But then
Certainly.
everybody wants babies because that's how they make money.
When you say corrupt, that's a strong word. You mean self-interest?
By corrupt. Oh, absolutely.
But those are different
boiling
things.
boiling down to money.
Excuse me, are you going
But
to wear
those are-
those?
Do we need to wear them?
No,
No.
but
Okay,
if
good.
you don't wear them, they got to be like this,
Yeah,
otherwise we get
everything's gotta be
feedback.
done like that.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
but I would say corrupt and self-interest are
phone
rather
call, then I'll
different
tell you.
kinds of
Well,
Go like
let's
words.
wait till we're in the program.
If you get a phone
This
call,
is
I'll tell you to
corruption.
go like this.
Okay.
Follow the
That's
train.
self-interest.
Otherwise, put them down.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever word we use to say that we the people are out
Oh,
of the loop.
wait till this
Yeah.
show. So, Rhett's taught me this, that the energy comes the first time you say it. Second time you say it, there's less energy.
Boy, it's been a while since I've been here. The last time was when All Aboard Florida was the red hot topic.
I know,
Yeah.
that was great.
Thanks for your support on all of that too, by the way.
Well,
That's great.
it
worked, didn't it?
It's work. It's
I've got an
slowed
update
down.
on the court lawsuits if you want it.
Everyone in Indian River County for your record-breaking generosity. They're working to ensure children stay on track to graduate from high school, college, or career-ready, to help more working individuals and families improve their financial literacy and stability, to build healthier communities for all children, adults, families, and seniors, and to support our most vulnerable neighbors when they need a hand up most. Longer term, your generosity helps lead the fight towards reaching their established goals, making a positive community impact on the education, financial stability, and health of area residents. The United Way builds partnerships, forges consensus, and leverages resources in order to advance the common good. They want to see all Indian River County residents have a quality education that leads to a stable job, enough income to support a family through retirement, and good health. You've helped them strive towards that success. Thank you for your generous donations, and let's all live united.
Vero Beach Regional Airport presents the escape to the mountains. That's right. Non-stop commercial jet service has begun from Vero Beach, Florida, direct into Asheville, North Carolina on Elite Airways. Of course, they have service to Newark's Liberty International Airport, the gateway to New York City. For more information, log on to www.verobeachairport.org. It's time to escape to the mountains. Non-stop commercial jet service to Asheville, North Carolina on Elite Airways. Free parking at the Vero Beach Regional Airport. Land near the sand.
You have the power to help us help others. Treasure Coast Community Health is a local healthcare provider for everyone. No one is turned down due to economic circumstances. Your generous support can help many in need. TCCH.
Okay, we have,
772-257-8224.
12 minutes. After when the segment, it's a 12-minute segment. Okay, then we
is
get
a
a break.
not-for-profit 501c. Donations are accepted.
Stand by, we're in the open.
Good morning. It's a good day to be thankful. And I'm thankful. It's Stanford Erickson. I'm sitting for Rhett Palmer, but I'm thankful because we have some guests today that will increase your intelligence and your information and probably your emotional intelligence, unless maybe you're a Democrat these days. It's very hard to increase your emotional intelligence these days if you're a Democrat. But we're trying to have every point of view here. So if some Democrats are upset there, they can call in. They can call into Mr. B and they will get their point of view as well. And I started as a Democrat, so I can understand it. The wonderful speakers we have today, our guests are Phyllis Fry. Phyllis Fry started as a pilot, woman pilot, and flew all over the country taking care of people. And then she decided to retire, and she's in Vero Beach here, and she is sort of the conscience of the county in terms of regionalism. and she's against regionalism or federal imposition on people. We also have Richard Kerr. Richard Kerr is a normal, steady person here, so kind, lives in Vero Beach. He was the former deputy director of the CIA during when President Bush was president, and worked his way more than 30 years on the CIA. He's here. But let's start with Phyllis, because Phyllis, what do we have to be concerned about this regionalism?
Well, Stan, thank you for having me as your guest, among your distinguished guests. And the problem with regionalism is that we're at high risk now of losing home rule of law. So if you like home rule of law, which gives you a voice in the governance of your community, don't get too comfortable, because home rule as a constitutional right is quickly becoming a thing of the past. In Tallahassee, for example, there's a concerted effort to erode home rule of law. Last year there were 30 bills floating around up there. Each and every one of them was a threat to home rule. This year there are even more. And obviously on a national level we see encroachments.
Why all these bills?
Oh, well, you know, for those who would prefer to see bureaucrats running our country.
But it makes everything more efficient and efficacious. I mean, that's
but we know. But our government is based upon home rule of law, and if we lose that, the system breaks down, ground up, starting at the grassroots level. It really does. So, and I hope, as I explained today, how regionalism is creeping into our community here. It's right at our door. It's not around the corner. I hope to help you understand and appreciate why we need to be made aware of this. Just as we raised awareness on so many other topics in the community, like All Aboard Florida, for example, once people were educated, they were able to make informed choices and to protect what we have here.
You're talking primarily in Indian River County and Vero Beach itself. What are some of the problems that are taking place? Okay.
We seem oblivious to these elements that are influencing our country. So what has happened now, and what has happened specifically in City Council, the regionalists have come in, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. First of all, there are 10 regional planning councils in Florida. How many out there?
How were they established?
Okay, in the 1970s, they were placed in the Florida statutes. And what has they're given power over, they're the overall governing body, just listen to this, regarding comprehensive land use, town planning, urban design, low-income housing initiatives, redevelopment, and transportation planning. That's an immense amount of power placed in the hands of regional government. Now, regional bureaucrats, not government bureaucrats. Now, when they were originally established, they served a good purpose. For example, if adjoining counties had roads that were coming together, they would intervene and help out with that. If sand had shifted from someone's beach to the next county, those kinds of things. But over time, like so many other things, they become overblown, overreaching, and given way too much.
Can they veto local cities and what they want? Can they veto
Not
that?
outright, but let me show you how they do it. It's an infiltration process. They become embedded in our documents. And right now, they are rewriting our comprehensive land use plan and changing its policies, which are laws, through rezoning. So not only will you not have a say in the future development of your community, they will control our land by controlling its designated uses. But they also then will control the people, the elected officials, and the voting demographics.
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying, but how can they do that if you've got a city council that says, we're not going to accept this?
Yes, but our city council is rolling over, and it boils down to money, and I'll give you a little history on that.
An example of them rolling over.
Yes, if you're going to the city council meetings right now, the only reason that this document wasn't passed, the Comprehensive Land Use 2035, which has been rewritten by the Regional Planning Council. Their fingerprints are all over it. The only reason the council at the June 6 meeting, which I thought was ironic, June 6, 1944, is because of my presentation to the council and revealing what's really in this document. It's a 400-page document. Nobody's reading it. Unless you do, and you start seeing how it's going to affect how we live, how we develop, where and how we live and travel on every level. and how it's going to fundamentally transform our community in something we don't recognize anymore and don't want. But the council said, okay, let's start having workshops so that we can dig into this document, find out what's in it.
That sounds like a good
So for the
compromise.
public, I want to encourage you to attend the first workshop on August 10th at the City Council meeting. Go to the City Council website, COVB, and you'll see on August 10th they haven't designated a time, but I'd encourage the public to attend. We need to hear your voice.
Well, you know, I covered medicine for a long time as a journalist, and there was great need for regional approach to medicine because every hospital wanted to have babies. They made money on babies. No one wanted the hospital that you deal with feet because you didn't make a lot of money on feet. And now every hospital wants cancer because you make a lot of money on cancer. So a regional approach is saying this hospital does this does this, and it's a more efficient, effective way in medicine. And so I began to understand that and said, I sort of agree with that because I saw children die who were premature. Now, why did they die? Because one hospital had a premature hospital, had the doctors, had the interns, had the facilities, they could take care of the child. If you went to another hospital and you're going to have a premature baby, and 90% of the time, by the 6th month, you know if they're going to have a premature baby. If they're going to have a premature baby, the doctor can use that hospital, so he says, go to that hospital, the baby's premature. Now they have to get an ambulance, bring it over to the hospital, and it usually dies because they're in the wrong hospital. So that's a reason for regionalism.
I
How
understand
does
that, and let me show you the flip side because
Okay.
there's definitely a flip side. So let me tell you how they infiltrate into our community. So very simply, they begin by taking aim at the poorest and most vulnerable among us. In the case of Vero Beach, they appeal to a group of low-income artists and offered them a utopian dream of lots of free housing and bicycles, taxpayers subsidized, so they can save the planet and live at the taxpayers' expense. Now, if you look at the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council's website,
I'm an artist. I like to be part of it.
who does? I invest in art. I support the arts. Nothing wrong with that. But they're being used like tools. So they begin with art villages. It's not difficult to gin up a special interest group. You know, the group wants to upgrade a neighborhood or looking for handouts for low-income housing. And by the way, HUD will definitely be involved. So they sent Dana Little, their minion, an urban planner from outside our area with the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council and the Cultural Arts, paid him to design an art village in Old Downtown. Well, you'll see, what does any of this have to do with art? So on the surface it sounded innocuous, as it was meant to, and a design charrette was held under the pretense of providing public input. So on the Cultural Art Council's video, we learned that the master plan isn't about an art village at all. In Mr. Little's own words, he explains the vision, blueprint, overlay, and the actual agenda of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. So from the transcript, in his own words, he states, our planning effort has been to guide the future development of neighborhoods. We're suggesting intervention. If you listen to this video, you'll see how many times he talks about intervention and development and overall overlay of a vision plan. So what it really comes to, he says, is modifying some of the zoning regulations. It's a blueprint to move policy, which are laws, into your community. So they're going to start re-engineering how we build, how we develop, and you're wondering, well, what's that got to do with anything? It's all for the sake of the developers. And it's high density population. Now, I don't think any of us moved here because we want high density population, but it's about changing the zoning laws to mixed use. If we have any planners out there, you'll know what I mean.
We have the former head of the CIA here. This sounds like conspiracy. He should get involved.
No, these are
But
facts.
we'll be right
These are
back.
direct quotes.
We'll
I've got
be
all
right
the
back
documents
in
here.
a few seconds.
Got all the documents to back it up.
No. I'm just doing that as a fun.
I know. And I am too.
Good morning, how are you?
We're having fun.
Now, she is dealing with the imposition of regional planning on local government.
Very important.
Yes. So we're going to then switch to Bob to talk a little bit about
Sounds
that
good.
too, and then you can counter him. Okay.
Oh, good. Great.
But you do see this as a conspiracy, right?
Well,
I've got the documents here.
I know nothing.
All the
Phyllis, we're not taking you on. We're just having fun.
No, take me on. I enjoy it. That's my kind of fun.
But this is outside of my area of expertise, of course.
Oh, no.
It is
Certainly
most
outside
people,
mine.
and that's how
You
that's
do.
how they succeed, because they know people
So
aren't.
what is
No,
it? What is it?
It's regionalism. It's a blueprint overlay to redevelop our entire town. Royal Palm Point, Old Downtown, Miracle Mile, US 1 Corridor, Oceanside and Cardinal Drive. And what
who
they do is,
imposing this
this is
on
the Regional Planning Council. They come in and they
What is
rewrite.
the region? Is it like
Okay,
Treasure Coast?
there are the Regional Planning Council. There are 10 Regional Planning Councils in Florida. The Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council has jurisdiction over Indian River County, St. Lucie County, and Martin counties. There are 7 counties that wanted to have a 50-year plan to re-engineer our communities for 50 years, how we travel, and squash us all into the transit-oriented corridor, never developing outside the urban boundary, and to densify and build up. Because a city charter controls 35 feet height, but if they get rid of our city charter, there's no limit.
right?
So,
right. So this is like a federalism.
correct, and we have no say. Home rule of law.
That's what federalism is all about.
They're bypassing locally elected officials. So you've got everything.
No, you got a soulmate here.
So
Trust
we got
me.
everything top down that everybody's focused on up here, and it's happening right here in our back.
And he used to work for the federal government. So.
Ooh, you're giving me chills. Keep your frenemies.
No, you're doing very well. You have to do the counters.
And
So
I'm
I
just
love
going
it.
back and forth a little bit just to test to see what it's like when we're not on air.
Because I lived on the road speaking at every venue possible back in 2012 when they first tried to come through here. City councils, HOAs, Rotary, you name it. And the people rose up and squashed it, said no. But now they're back. Because you know the progressives keep
See, I'm
coming
good.
back.
Yeah, I got a pen. I'm going to hit you with the same kind of thing as Stan was
Yeah.
getting at,
If you need-
because
Thank you.
what we want is like those impulsive comments, not impulsive, but heartfelt comments.
Well, and I have, believe me, I've done my homework on
Oh,
this.
I believe
I've
you.
attended the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Councils
Right.
for 2 years, and they have these design charrettes where they have a predetermined outcome, and people put their little suggestions in the box, and they go, that's great, and then they have this agenda already laid out. It's not just about redevelopment, it's about flipping the voting demographic, because all of this low-income housing that they're going to put on top of existing business, they put retail on the bottom, all that densification and low-income housing on the top.
I'm always
Is this-
suspicious of zealots.
Who votes?
Yeah, does this seem a little idealistic to you?
Yeah.
What do you?
I can't lie down for this. I cannot roll over. I will not let them have their way. They're not
Another
gonna do it.
zealot in the
And
world,
I don't
that's all I
like.
need.
You thought about having a tea party?
Yeah, I don't like my city council members being used like tools, and they put the bait in front of them. $860,000.
no, I love her.
$860,000. What public, and especially
And where
in
does the money come from?
And you, it's your tax money.
Hey, it's Stanford Erickson again. We were listening to Phyllis Fry, and she's opposed to the imposition of regional planning on local government. Also joining us right now is Robert Edminster. He's a PhD. He's a former university professor and dean. He also worked for the federal government in terms of economics. We got more brain power in here. I sort of, when I come, I always like very intelligent people around me, so I don't have to talk too much, and they will talk. So, Bob, you've been involved with regional a little bit, and imposition of regional a little bit. Now, what do you think about Phyllis wanting home rule to trump over a regionalism?
Right, when you impose like federalism over regionalism, which is what the issue is all about, there are pros and cons to that. And but one of the big cons to that is that the small areas like Vero Beach know what the people in Vero Beach want. And when you impose somebody's ideal concept of the perfect world on that, that's not what people in Vero Beach want. Okay.
Well, Richard Kerr, former deputy director of CIA, do people know what they want sometimes? Isn't that the problem?
Well, I'd have to hear. I know very little about this argument of regionalism. Look, all I can say is what I've heard about local governments doesn't inspire me either, in that I've seen some of the most corrupt things happen at the local level for self-interest. for real estate, for people rezoning. So I don't have a lot of confidence in any of the systems. You'd have to tell me the specific problem that you're working on. And I would not be a zealot for one or the other. And clearly, you're a zealot.
An informed zealot, an educated zealot.
Well, I like Phyllis because she has done her homework. She works very hard.
Yeah, all zealots do their homework.
But Phyllis, what another instance? How else is this regional approach doing harm to us here in Vero Beach?
It is taking away our local voice, you and I, because we don't attend these meetings. We really don't know what's going on. The public doesn't know. And they'll turn around and say, we'll turn around in 2 to 5 years and say, how did this happen?
But this is just a question, and I don't disagree with you because I don't know it, but is it substituting something better? Is it giving something to a larger group? Is it giving perhaps something that is an advantage over the long run as opposed to a narrow little parochial interest?
Well, do you like driving your automobile? Because automobiles are not part of this plan.
Now, but see, you're being an extremist.
I am not. It's in here. It's in here.
You mean they're going to take away my automobile?
They're going to redesign our streets. They're called complete streets. It's happening all over the country. They're going to narrow the twin pairs down to one lane. They're going to make it biker pedestrian friendly, because with all this densification, do we not have enough congestion already? So with all this densification, they've got to do something about automobiles. So now the propaganda is live in a walkable, bikeable community. But that's great. Did you walk here today in the 90-degree heat? No. Do you still have a car? Yes. Why? Because you like, well, there won't be room for automobiles. The way they develop is they are densifying. It's called mixed use zoning codes. And this is how they control how we're going to live and
I can
in the
see
future.
some areas where it would be a great advantage.
They love it in Miami.
No,
I
can see some
Lauderdale.
areas
They love it in Palm Beach.
in a community where I would not oppose that. There are other areas I would. So I guess as a general statement, I'm not sure what to make of what you're saying.
Well, when you came to Vero Beach and you settled in here, did you settle in because you like the Miami densification and
I've never been to Miami.
and
so.
upward sprawl of big cities? I'm sure you've been to other big cities that are condensed and densified and
DC,
compacted.
that's condensed.
There you go. So if you like it there and people have that choice, that's their prerogative, then go there. We don't have that here yet, but we will if this passes. So it's your choice of lifestyle and your voice
So we're
in
giving up
having a
choice.
say.
That's the issue, isn't
That's
it?
it. It's not
And-
going to be optional.
Yeah, it's not optional.
That's right.
And it
It's
sounds
law.
like what they're trying to do is to imprint Florida with what Europe has, which are
Yes.
cities, and you go to the boundary of the city, and you're in agricultural land right now.
You're right, spot on. We have a western urban boundary, and we have environmental enthusiasts who say we mustn't pierce that urban boundary line. And what that does is it creates a false housing economy by driving up the price of single-family homes, and now younger people cannot afford the homes. Now they're forced into taxpayer subsidized housing,
And it
the-
has political consequences
It
in that
does.
when we have those
It
dense
does.
when we have those dense cities, surprise, surprise, they become democratic.
Amen.
Right? They're all Democrats.
Spot on.
Right, because they can't afford where they're living, and so they need rent control. They need all these various political, right?
I rest my case, and they're so enthusiastic about
I'm
not
just
having
suggesting,
budget.
I don't
well,
know.
That is a fact of the matter, because if it's happening down to the south, we only need to look to the south to see how it's happening, and it's creeping up this way. These people, these planners, are not from here, and they don't care about our living preferences. The regional planning councils are so powerful in Tallahassee with lobbyists and politicians that they have the power to get grants. HUD, DOT, and EPA, and that pretty much boxes the compass on controlling everything that we do, every aspect of our lives, transportation, housing, and the EPA.
Well, I'm concerned too. I tend to agree with Phyllis to some degree, but I'm concerned as well in that I look at all the county commissioners, and almost all of them have been real estate developers in some way, construction. I'm saying, my goodness, do we need another person on the county commission who his background is that he builds things
Well, the
and he
other
wants to
question
build things?
is it's how you build them and how you live, And basically, you're giving the government an easement on your life inside your environment.
Well,
that could be
that's well
inside
said.
of your car.
You are
You
so
you
right.
like to put, you like to put your chewing gum in your car, but you can't put your chewing gum on the subway. Okay? So you lose your rights on your space, and then inside your building, and where your building is, and all these kinds of things. You're turning all of this over to the bureaucracy.
We're going to go in the next half hour. We're going to talk about international politics and local and national politics as well.
Thank
and
God.
Phyllis is going to be part of that as well. But Phyllis, how can they reach you? How can you be taught if someone wants to talk to you?
I want you to contact me at global6@msn.com. That would be great.
Say it again.
Global6@msn.com. And our councils are becoming corrupt. They invited the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council in, and when I asked them why, they said because they can get the grants.
We'll be right back. Thank you. We have our wonderful guests.
We're being sold down the river.
When you do this, it carries over.
Oh, I'm
really
sorry.
loud on the radio.
Clear, you're in the news. Good job.
Okay. Now.
Phew, I got that out of my system.
Yeah.
You're great.
I'm so glad you understand
See,
it.
the parallels between that and financial economics are very, very close.
Yes, they are.
Because what's happened is the federal government has taken over the power on what happens to a person's savings, which affects what you get on your savings account at the bank.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that later.
This is
This
what
town is about to flip
that
into a
Richard
government
wants.
subsidy that
Richard.
is just, it can only grow.
Oh, I don't know. These are just thoughts.
No. Let's start there.
Oh, my goodness.
Let's switch to this.
Okay.
And you have a
I
point
promise
of
to
view
be
which
quieter.
No. You have a point of view that's very useful, and you'll see, because really this is controlling too. And how we plan our national agenda is important as well.
It all ties in.
It all ties in.
It sure does. Good subjects.
You might want to bring up David's Saudi approach too. And I don't disagree with David in saying that the neocons, I always felt, were sort of the stalking horse. If you study neocons, Strauss was it, and most of them were secular Jewish people, and they all almost everyone, I knew a lot of them. They all started as Marxist.
Mm-hmm.
They all started as Marxists, and then they said that doesn't work, and then they became neocons, and sort of libertarian types. But one thing in common, they all wanted to do away with Iran. And I said, what's the common denominator in doing away with Iran? Well, Israel is the common denominator for doing away with Iran.
Israel is a very driving part of their interest, obviously.
Yes, it is. And so that's, I'm not saying it wasn't heartfelt. And
Well, they were looking at too at a big world.
Yeah, but at a big world. But let's get into that a little bit, and I'll throw that in a little bit.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I can understand that, what David is saying, but it's nice that everything ties in like David does. Nothing ties in.
You have to
No.
connect. You have to connect dots.
You have to,
know.
but sometimes there are no
Some people
dots.
try to connect dots where
That
there
aren't
are
there.
no connections.
Yes.
True.
There are no dots.
You have to. It's difficult, and the problem with journalists is they become part of the agenda
Yes.
rather than trying to
Yes.
observe it. In my opinion.
Right.
But let's start with an ISIS, okay? Because we're seeing it.
Well,
Mosul's
what
almost been
next,
taken-
I think, is an important.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. What's
Yeah.
next? And will it lead to war? As David is saying that this suggestion that they're going to do chemicals to justify another bombing.
They would be stupid to do it,
I'm just.
but
The
they can do
consequences are
stupid things.
Yes.
They've demonstrated that,
Yeah.
and so have we.
So we're going to move
We're going to move to ISIS. Yes.
to ISIS next.
When
Okay.
when we destabilized the Middle East, that was just the dominoes just started
Do
falling.
you think that began after World War II? What the
Yeah,
British
well,
did to
yeah.
win and
Oh,
sliced
sure.
it up
They were very
with-
unhappy
without
about that.
really
Those
full
arranged
regard
promises
for the
that they
ethnic
made.
groups.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it goes back.
Now we have 14 minutes for
You
the
can
next
take it
segment.
back long before that if you wish.
5,000
Lawrence
years.
of Arabia.
Yeah,
No, you can go back to the Crusades.
Yeah,
and
right.
Earlier, you know.
true.
You want to destabilize the Middle East, it's easy.
And destabilized it is.
Next segment is 14 minutes, so we have enough time to talk.
Oh, that's a long time.
14 minutes.
Let me ask you the question, why don't we get call-ins?
I think we should. I think it's just operationally they have problems, but we should have tie-in. And we can
Does
talk.
that mean we don't have an audience?
We have to screen our calls.
They have in the
They
past.
do research
Well, that's-
here, and
that's
he has
true.
the largest audience of anybody here in the morning.
Do they have the manpower?
His
Right.
friend, Jim Davis, is in charge of all the radios here, and Clear Channel owns it, they do it, and he says that Rhett has the largest
Who
audience.
owns the station? Who owns the
iHeart.
station?
This is owned by Clear Channel, but he buys the time.
The time. I've never understood the radio stations and who owns what and
I
wow.
know
Yeah, and
where
how the
you are.
FCC slices that up.
Are you following the events in Kabul?
In what?
Well,
In the capital.
yeah, in the capital, because they're very close to getting the ISIS out of northern Iraq, right?
Yeah,
You think they are?
yeah. They're
Stand by.
breaking. Well, that's part of what this is about, yeah. In Raqqa, they're out of Raqqa.
They're out of Iraq?
It's
now?
not
about
Rhett Palmer,
one
I'm
little
sorry,
area.
it's
We need to cover
Stanford Erickson. And we have some interesting guests here. Richard Kerr, we've been talking about something domestically now with Phyllis Fry, but ISIS is on the top of your mind these days. What's happening with ISIS?
Well, it looks as though the last little remnants of ISIS control in Raqqa are about ready to fall. Apparently they hold only a very small portion of the city. Now, they are tenacious, and they're gonna fight kind of to the death. But they're gonna lose. They're gonna lose Raqqa, which is the center of ISIS, the ISIS control. And Mosul is largely gone. So they are in effect losing all the big areas that they controlled in Iraq. So they're still going to have some access to small
The
villages.
caliphate is over, right?
It's going to be gone. Yeah, they're going to be able to point to no area that they control.
Well, the reason for the caliphate, and I think a lot of people don't understand this, is many progressive people say, well, if we just gave them money and gave them a career, and if they had hope, there would be no caliphate. Now, this is the caliphate, my understanding, the caliphate was created because if they did that, the Messiah, their Messiah, would come down and fight for them.
This is a goal of religion.
Yes, this is a mindset, so that's why they're willing to die for this.
Absolutely.
Because they think their Messiah will come if he sees they're in trouble. So that's why they'll fight to the death. Is that not
No
correct?
question. I mean, this is not just political or even primarily political control of the area. This is a religious crusade on their part.
Yes. So what happens now if they no
Well, that's
longer
a
have the caliphate?
very interesting question, and I don't know where will they go. They certainly will continue to have the ability to conduct terrorism throughout Europe, and they have established some areas in Libya. They are trying to get some areas in Pakistan. They are thought to have trying to get some areas of influence in the Philippines, and in Indonesia. So it is not that they're going to disappear. They're going to have people spread out, but they're not going to be as an army. They're going to be a group of dissidents that are kind of spread out and in some ways more difficult to find.
Now, but what happens to Syria when they go as well. There's a void there. What's going to happen there?
That's a very good question. I think that's something well worth debating. I think we were talking about federalism and talking about the logical thing that people are saying is Syria is going to be divided into three really separate areas. A Sunni area, a Kurdish area, and an area under the control of Saddam and his tribe, the Alawites. And then maybe there will be one person over the three areas. But it is very difficult to imagine a federal system that incorporates the Kurds, the Sunnis, and the Alawites operating anything like a real country.
How do you
it's
deal
impossible.
How do you deal with oil?
So-
How do you deal with trade? How do you deal with
absolutely.
energy? All these.
It's more likely we'll have three major warring areas that have some kind of temporary truces. But it's hard to imagine a real country. I don't think Syria will exist as a country.
Who are the players that are influencing this? David Hunter, who usually is on this program with us, former State Department foreign official, foreign officer, feels that the Saudis and Israel are really wanting to create these problems because they want to do away with Iran. Now, maybe I'm misstating what David says, but that's my indication, my thought process. Is that what's happening as well? Are we being snookered into another war?
I don't think so. I mean, we are in several wars right now. One in Iraq, one along the edge in a good part of Syria. I don't think I don't think we want to go to a war with Iran. I don't think the administration sees that as a goal. I think what it would like to cut back Iranian influence. And let's face it, the Iranians have direct influence with Saddam. They are running a lot of the operations for Saddam in Syria, Iran and Hezbollah. So the Iranians are trying to establish with Assad a
yes.
very firm grip on a good part of Syria, because they see this crescent of land running all the way up to the Mediterranean, giving them influence and giving them the ability to have a direct influence on the area.
Plus, they get all of the oil. They get the oil money, and that is the major source of income for all of those countries.
So the Iranians have, there's no doubt the Iranians have designs on that area, and they're not in our, it's not in our interest.
Bob,
I was going to ask you this question
Sure.
before we go on, though.
Sure.
I think the seeds for peace may be laid by the horrific acts of ISIS. I mean, ISIS has maimed, killed, raped, pillaged those people so badly that they are now rising up. What do you think about that, Richard?
Well, I think they're going to lose. They're losing a good deal of hold on the Sunni population, and so I don't think they have influence over the Sunnis as a group. Except through intimidation, and their ability to intimidate is slowly being reduced.
Phyllis Fry, you see the situation. Do you think President Trump is astute enough to understand that there are elements that really want to force him into a war, and that he can deal with that?
I do. I think he's surrounded by, and correct me if I'm wrong, or being presumptuous, but I think that he's surrounded with the right kind of people who give him correct information to make those kind of judgment calls. I do.
No, I think she's right. I think he has a very, now I know, as we were saying, David Hunter would say he's surrounded by a group of people who are urging him on for a war with Iran. I personally don't believe that. I believe there are some people there who would like to tighten the grip and respond to Iranian threats and Iranian intimidation. And I agree with that, actually. I don't think we should let the Iranians push us around. And when they do, I think we should respond. But I don't think that means we're walking toward war with them, or we intend that to be the objective. I don't know what your thought would be, Bob.
Bob Edminster.
Yeah, I see the same thing. But I think this comes down to the tribal politics. I have always believed that. That's very, very strong in those countries. And so the question is, who wins the hearts of those tribes and the tribal leaders?
My experience on that is covering all those people is they've been like that for so many centuries that you don't win over their hearts. you got to win over them with force. You know, you're not going to, you know, I knew a lot of the neocons who were supporting us going in Iraq, and they were saying if we just change the environment, because most of these people came out of Marxism, and so they believe that if you change the economic and social environment, people want to be Democrats and want to vote and want to have good hearts. You know, that was the thought process. Well, you can't change people. It takes a long time. It took a long time to change me. I mean, I started out of Berkeley. It took a long time for me to change, you know, like 35 years before I said, well, maybe socialism and being a Democrat isn't the best way.
Tribalism will win out.
Yes. Yeah.
I think tribalism will dominate any efforts to move toward a democracy or sharing and I mean, to think the best of people is one thing, but to ignore the fact that there are tribal instincts that are almost impossible to break down. And we've broken them down through several hundred years of complex interaction and a different setting. You can't replicate that in another country in 10 years or 20 years or 100 years. It's just not going to happen, in my judgment.
Well, I've been studying.
Let me say, I think there's a ray of hope, however. Look what's happened in Ireland. You have almost the same thing, right, with the Protestant Catholic issue as you do with the tribal issues. And they have learned how to have accords, right, not necessarily unions in the state form, but accords so they can all get along and have a good life.
Well, Richard was involved in bringing that together.
Richard, is that a model?
Yeah, is that a model?
That works?
Well, actually, we you know, the whole peace process that began during the time of troubles in the early 70s and continued. I was involved in that for about 7 years, and it still goes on. I mean, there's still this Protestant Catholic antagonism.
But they got tired of the killing.
But they did get tired of it, and the younger people got tired of saying, I want a business, I want to establish my life, and I have children. But it's still there is a tribalism even there, but other things have come to dominate: economic progress, some social changes, some political changes, and quite honestly, the IRA and the hardliners on the Catholic side finally said, we're going to go into a political action.
We'll be back in a few minutes. We'll talk about what happens to the Democrat Party. It's in sort of disarray. We'll be right back.
That's a good question.
That was a good segment.
What an interesting segment. Oh, my goodness.
See, just jump in.
There are times to listen, and there are
I know,
times
but
to talk.
jump in too. You got to just be loose.
Well, you see, I mean, are we just a tribe here in Vero Beach?
Oh yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. We do have a tribe here.
I'm going to start wearing more paint. I'm telling
I
you.
see the correlation.
These people. Oh, sorry, I'm not supposed to do that.
We are a tribe. I see that.
Yeah.
Well, you go back and read the Federalist Papers. I mean, all of these issues are old issues.
It's when you read
Nothing
it,
new under the
you
sun.
should read Dickinson and you should read Madison. Madison was Virginia, and Madison believed in states' rights because Virginia wanted slaves.
Well, there's your example. The difference between Virginia and New York.
Yes.
You want to talk about tribes?
Yes.
And that was in the late 1700s.
And I studied that. I can't believe everybody says Madison was what? No, he liked slaves. So he had all these reasons for having slaves.
And he had economic reasons. He
Yes,
had political
it's economic
That was the whole-
reasons
yeah.
because slavery kept Virginia dominant.
Yeah, and because it
Phyllis,
was a
this is
culture.
what you're really
And that's what it
arguing
boils down
about
to.
is there's some power up here who says all of these communities need to give up.
That's it.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
That's it. And we're going to give them the money. We're going to give them
Oh, well, they're
the
going to buy
grants.
them.
Yeah.
It's a bribe.
That's it. And our elected officials, as you mentioned earlier, they're rolling over to it. But at least it'll be a matter of public record. If they succeed, I want to make it a matter of public record so that we can look back and say, how did this happen
Well, maybe
on
you
your watch?
maybe you can slow it and change it and
Yes.
affect it.
We did get rid of it in 2012. We had an uprising. I mean, I spearheaded a movement in 7 counties. I lived on the road, and the people became educated and they rose up. But the progressives keep coming back, as we know.
We have a minute before we go back on the air, right? But Richard, I would like to have us deal with the horrific actions that are taken in the Middle East. They still have a slave market twice a week in Saudi Arabia, do they not?
I don't know Saudi Arabia. I don't think so.
I've heard this.
In Yemen, probably.
Maybe Yemen, they have a slave
And
market.
certainly they do in some other parts
Right.
of
But it's
Africa.
trafficking in people.
Yeah, I
It's
don't
definitely
think
there.
there's a. It's a much more subtle slave market in Saudi Arabia. They just hire Filipinos
Yes.
Oh, is that it?
Yes, yes.
for cheap
Absolutely.
They trade 'em.
and they put them on barges, and they're the workers. But it's not slavery in the same
Okay.
sense that you would think of it in the other areas of
You
Africa.
you would know, and I was really asking
timid.
clarification of what the facts are.
Well, I
Because
mean,
I've heard that they actually have a live slave market, but that could have been an
I would
exaggeration
doubt
by
it
somebody.
very much.
I doubt it too. If you don't bring it
There,
up.
there,
But there are other horrific kinds of things that are
there are
going
probably
on.
still people in the Middle East that buy people, buy women, buy girls, buy young men, buy servants.
Right.
I'm sure that, but there are still markets, a few places in Africa, but not. I don't think Saudi Arabia.
Okay. But maybe Yemen. We
Well,
don't know.
all through those.
Don't say it
areas.
if it's not true. I mean,
No,
I don't want to
I don't
delusion
know
about
for a
it.
fact, but there are slave markets in parts of Africa.
You have to jump. Your instincts are good. Trust your instincts. Okay?
You know, my husband lived and worked in the Middle East as a corporate pilot and for oil company in the 70s, and it was business as usual over there. I mean, there wasn't this ISIS, and there wasn't I mean, it was amongst themselves.
My aunt worked for the
Palestine.
U.S. Embassy in Tehran during that period too, and it was fairly calm, beautiful. Beirut was the gem of the Mediterranean.
Absolutely, it was a beautiful city. I've been there when it was at its best and at its worst, where you couldn't walk out to your hotel without fear of
Last
being
spot.
shot.
Stand by for rejoin.
Okay. It's the last spot we'll go in. I'm going to start with quoting this, and then we'll go into the Democrat Party. What's
Yes, feel free.
Yeah.
I don't want to dominate this.
Oh no, no,
No,
no.
we're
We're
changing
switching-
topics a little bit. then.
Richard,
Yeah.
you're just great. You just talk. That's great. If you people talk, I don't have to, so it's great.
You're a good
Well, you
moderator.
need to talk.
Yeah.
Well, no, I throw in, but I'd rather. It's the audience prefers that. They like different points of view. Hey, it's Stanford Erickson again, and I'm back with these very influential and important guests. But I thought I'd start first with this. The Press Journal today had a wonderful guest editorial by Mary Kate Carey, who was a speechwriter for George H.W. Bush, and she said, everybody should read this. The headline says, Democrat Party desperately needs life-saving autopsy. Roughly 80% of us now live in states either partially or totally controlled by Republicans. 2/3 of our nation's governors are now Republican, tying a 94-year-old record, an all-time high. 69 of 99 state legislations have now Republican majorities. In half of our 50 states, both the state legislature and the governor are controlled by Republicans. What happened to the Democrats? Phyllis, are you a Democrat?
Well, did you ever see that movie Trains, Planes, and Automobiles? And you remember the scene where John Candy and Steve Martin was sitting on the truck by the road and the car was on fire behind them? You remember that scene? And Steve Martin started laughing and he turned around and he said to John Candy as he's laughing and laughing, you finally did it to yourself, you know? So the Democrats have done it to themselves, and I just have to laugh and laugh. I mean, I'm so happy to see that they
Well, you're
won out, so to speak.
among us. You're a woman.
Yeah.
Don't you?
But you'll always be twice the man I am. Don't ever forget that.
See, Nancy Pelosi, can't you identify with her in some way?
In some ways, certainly I can. I mean, as she said in her own words, she loves being in the arena. That's her, that's her reason to be, I really think. And she certainly believes strongly in what she is saying. And when she doesn't believe it, she wings it pretty well.
I think she wings it a lot. They criticize Trump, but Nancy Pelosi wings it a lot.
And she's just becoming laughable. She's just becoming a joke, and she needs to just go away.
She's kind of becoming a caricature.
Yes,
I think,
perfect word for it. She needs to just
word,
wander away.
That really described. I mean, it's kind of, in some ways, it's kind of sad.
Right.
To look at her and listen to her.
I agree.
Well, she says
And
she's a very astute leader of the Senate. That's what she described herself as, very astute.
Of the House, yeah.
Yes, I'm of the Senate, of the House. I'm from San Francisco, and I know where Nancy Pelosi lives, and near Pacific Heights. And in front of her house are socialists and really progressive people, and they're picketing her because she's not progressive enough.
Oh my gosh!
Every
What
day
does
she
that
comes
tell
out, opens the
you?
door, she sees. Now maybe they're not doing it now. Every time I've been there, they've been there, and that's. I mean, from her mindset, she's from San Francisco, and they think she's. My niece wrote me recently. She was criticizing an op-ed that I wrote, and she said, "Well, I'm a socialist," and I'm thinking she's a socialist, but she's proud of being a socialist. She's a lawyer. I mean, she's had all the advantages and everything, and so she really wants to take care of people now. So she's a socialist. I mean, that's what's happened. I mean, the rest of the country is sort of, Bob, can't relate to this to some degree.
They definitely can't relate to it, and they think we've gone crazy. Do you know, this is in the finance world, right? But they seriously discussed helicopter money. Helicopter money is this concept where you take actual currency, $20 bills, and you put them in a helicopter and you fly over the city and you kick the bales of money out there and it flutters down and everybody grabs money and everybody's got what they need.
Everybody's happy.
Yeah.
And they'll buy and that'll keep the economy going, right?
Oh yeah,
Right.
and then all of a sudden people say, where does the money come from?
Oh.
What? Where do you think?
Out of your pocket.
That's right.
The
And
government doesn't
and
have
you
any
realize-
money.
And they look at their slip at the end of the month or the end of the week and their pay slip and they see all this money being taken out. And realize that's the helicopter money.
Well, there's Warren Buffett has come out with this, and so has the head of Google and the head of Facebook. They have said that, we're going to have this major unemployment because of automation and globalization, and we have to just give people a standard of living. Just give them
Minimum
money.
salary, right?
Yes, so that they don't have to work. They'll just give them some money because otherwise you're going to have a riot. And just like Rome, you have these circuses, and you give them bread, and you have circuses, and therefore the establishment that have got theirs. I mean, these are all billionaires that are talking.
And
They got theirs. They want to keep theirs, so we have to keep the rabble down, right?
Yep, and don't forget the wine.
Hey, Rome wasn't destroyed in a day. It'll take them a while, but it didn't work out in Venezuela.
And the marijuana. You got to have the marijuana.
Oh my!
Richard, is that? I mean, I started as a Democrat. I can't relate to the party now. I'm a white male. That's maybe a reason, but I just can't relate to the party.
No, it's very hard. And I was certainly started as a Democrat. I've always said that when you're young, if you're not a Democrat, you have no heart. And if you're older and you are a Democrat, you have no mind.
Yeah, well, you're from Oregon. I'm from California, so we all started there.
Yes, my family were Democrats.
Yeah.
So true.
Oh, I
Absolutely
guess
true.
I'm the
Back in
odd
the
man
day.
out because I started when I was 12 years old pulling the paper wagon with newspapers on it to earn 12 cents, okay? And so I started very young as a capitalist and saved some of my money and started buying stocks at age 17.
I say I started as a Democrat, but I helped my stepfather work for Dewey. I mean, that shows that was a fair time ago,
That was a surprise loss, wasn't it?
Well, politics aside, if I may, I grew up in a small southern town, and my mother was a single mom, and she had very little education at that time, although she went back and prospered. But during those years, my formative years, it was the work ethic that mattered. It had nothing to do with politics, but you will always work. You will always work. And I'm still working in retirement.
And you don't accept charity.
Exactly. She never did, ever. So that example was laid forth to me. To me, that's everything. I hope people would come from such a privileged background as
And have
as
you ever
that.
heard anybody else tell that same story? I've heard it over and over again.
Absolutely.
That's
And that is fundamental to America.
Exactly right. Those
Yeah,
are core values.
It's that's a core value, and the wonderful thing is we can work here and have social mobility, economic mobility. If you're in what I call European socialism, and I have a lot of friends in Europe, they don't even understand that it's socialism. They say, "Oh, it's not social. It's European socialism. It's a form of keeping the middle class and the lower class down." That's what this form. This country is unique because we can actually, as you say, start investing when you're 17. You can do that. In other countries, you take a test at 12 and it determines what you're going to do at 12. If I took a test at 12, I'd be a plumber somewhere.
Yeah, but Stanford, don't you think that one of the reasons Trump won, I say this because I believe this, but I believe one of the reasons he won is because people were so upset with the change in our values, that people no longer had a work ethic, that people, or they felt that we were losing
We'll be right back.
our culture.
More thoughts in a few moments.
Couldn't agree with you more because I think people saw it slipping away.
Clear for the news.
I did.
Slipping away.
Okay,
Yeah.
we got
And
we
so
got
we
about 5
wanted
minutes.
an
Bring it back.
You can stand up,
Yep.
walk around.
Yeah, good.
I went to see Trump a couple of 3 months ago down in Melbourne. I must tell you, not the first president I've been in the presence, but the enthusiasm. I mean, people were on crutches. They were on walkers. They were on
Save that. Save that.
Oh
No,
my
No,
word!
no, save that.
Save your enthusiasm.
Yeah,
you're
we
doing
want
it.
that.
No, that's
Curb
good.
your enthusiasm.
No, don't curb it.
Save it. Save it for
Bottle it
another
up,
moment.
and then we're going to pull the cork.
But honestly, I mean, I shook Bill Clinton's hand in
Do we
Guam. I
have a
washed
couple
my
minutes?
hand
Okay,
after.
Bob, yes, when we come back, the stock market, what's going to happen to the stock market?
Is that what you want to talk about?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell me what's going to happen to it. I'm worried.
Okay.
See, because I think that the fundamental issue that applies to 99% of the people is why are banks still paying virtually no interest after 10 years after the
That's-
crisis
okay.
on our CDs?
Very
Okay.
important. Yep.
We'll go to the economy and you can go into that, okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are we going to have a depression next year?
Well,
Next couple-
we'll leave it for the radio.
I just want them to think about that.
Well,
I think, well, I'll tell you what I think, is that discussion of this.
Leave it for the radio.
We'll save it for the radio.
Because there's more
waiting.
Stay
It
tuned.
keeps
I'll
us
tell
in
you later. I'll
suspense.
answer your
It
question
keeps us
later.
in
There's more
suspense.
energy, and that's
Jump
in
good.
just like you
Save
did.
it for the radio.
Oh my. I'm going to have to excuse myself before too long because I have a doctor appointment this morning.
Okay.
But
Stay as
I will
long as
leave
you
it in
can.
your very
No,
capable hands.
Stay as long as you can, and trust your instincts. You have good instincts.
Yeah, let her talk. When are you leaving? No, when are you
I
leaving?
think, listen,
Let her.
probably in
Yeah, would
about
you carry this
no,
for a
no,
while?
no, don't do that.
Let
I
us
want
rest.
no, I want to hear what you were about to say. I mean, that is so, money. We're getting down to the financial, and since you're obviously one of the what was it, 1,000? I read your bio. It's very important. You're
Oh.
all very important here. I mean, in your category.
Yeah, they rank us, so we
Yeah.
have world rankings.
Yeah.
Is that right?
You look familiar. I don't know where I've seen you around town, or do you live here?
I live here, sure.
All year. Mhm, yeah.
Well, he stalks pretty ladies every once in a while too.
I
I didn't say that. I didn't
No,
say that.
well,
Careful, you're on the.
You know-
I know. I'm on YouTube.
hey,
Shouldn't say that.
I wanted to be a flight attendant when I was a little girl, but I wasn't pretty enough, so I had to become a pilot. So,
Oh, you became a
those are the
pilot.
breaks. Yeah,
I
the
wanted to be on
commercial pilot.
television. I wasn't
The
pretty
airline-
enough, so I became a preacher.
Yeah, a face for radio, obviously, right?
No, you're beautiful. I can see you in a
Oh,
cockpit.
sweetie, yeah, your
everybody
eyes
going,
must be. Yeah.
Whoa.
Well, I
And
wanted
she
one of
flies
the. I
too?
wanted an F4 with a young guy painted on the side wearing a Speedo bathing suit and killer shaking big
There you
letters.
go.
But I never got it. I had to come up through the civilian ranks. But those are the breaks.
So did they paint you in a bikini
Yeah.
on the outside of the commercial boat?
Okay.
No.
We gotta
I
get
met my
away from
husband and
We got to get away from this part. get in trouble. We'll get in trouble.
Anyway,
I brought it up.
It's going downhill.
I don't talk about flying unless
My
I'm
fault.
paid for it, so
My
there's an end
absolute
to it.
fault.
The program's gone to hell.
I know, it's my fault.
Where's that handbasket?
But we'll switch to the economy now, Bob.
Yes.
and you can
Okay.
go for that.
Well, you were going to do
Those are the documents.
the Democratic Party,
Yeah,
too.
what I like,
Let's get to the economy.
we need a woman on this every once in a while, so we need a woman. So-
Diversity, it's called.
Yeah. Well, it's a different mindset. It's a different voice. That they want.
Well, you've written so much about women, so you're the preeminent of the three.
The women want a voice, so it's very important that.
Well, thank
feel-
you for
Yeah, that you,
These are your notes. Are you passing these
I'm
to
giving the
us?
copies to you.
Really?
Yes,
It's
so
all
that you'll understand.
Marked up?
Oh, she works hard.
I need to understand this.
Oh, she,
Well, I mean, I think you've got the
I mean,
grasp.
I think this
you have
has
a grasp,
to do with the railroad.
firm
I mean,
grasp.
oh yes.
Ah,
But you talk about self-interest.
Oh.
Oh my gosh.
Can I show you my gravy train?
Oh.
Starting with the poor taxpayer at the front, going right through
She
the
was a
judge. and-
leading
That-
person.
I mean, this went
do
up to
that.
Tallahassee. We stopped
Oh,
this
that
thing.
is
We
great.
stopped this thing. And this is where grassroots
You have stopped
matters.
it.
We have stopped it. Here's an update for
well,
you
they
on,
cannot finance it.
for
That's-
later on the.
No, they can't finance
No.
it. It does.
right.
It's not economically viable.
And the Chinese
And
are
it-
buying into it. So
Oh, good.
Whole thing in itself, whole subject,
The
all
Chinese-
about transit
the
oriented
Chinese are buying-
development. Who does
buying the
high density
Florida East Coast
population?
rail system.
That's
The
right.
Chinese-
You know-
Chinese are building their own railroad,
well, they need to build
the
it.
Silk Route.
Yeah, the Silk Route. You're absolutely.
We need to
right.
talk about that sometime.
Okay.
That's one of the most fascinating projects. And from an economic point of view, I don't understand it, but it seems to me has major implications economically.
Oh, all
The Silk Road.
transportation developments have big consequences economically.
Well, this would
The transcontinental pipeline, the transcontinental railroad under Lincoln. I mean, all of
We're
these.
into
things.
local spots. You got about 2 minutes.
This
2.5
would connect
minutes.
China and the Far
Europe.
East to Europe.
Right, right. But it's a train.
That's a train.
Now, let me tell you this: they have some new trains that will go 300 miles an
Well,
hour.
Chinese are building those.
Yeah.
Now, this is going to be a long time before they have them on that road, but
just to plant a little seed for you regarding trains in Florida, LNG is the next big thing. They're going to build a facility in Titusville. They're going to connect in Tampa for the for the Asian market. LNG.
Export LNG.
And they've got a
Why would they
facility
need to
in
do that in
downtown.
Florida? They got that in the Gulf already.
Well, what I'm saying is that the freight end is it's a $3 trillion venture nationwide, and Florida would be part of the network. One of the reasons Mexico bought FEC is because they have LNG down there. And
now, are you
connecting
opposed to
through.
that?
No, I'm not opposed to that. Absolutely
I was going to
not.
say, it sounds
No.
to me like it enormously,
Yeah.
but I don't understand why it would be,
Why would?
why
No.
wouldn't you go the other
I don't see
direction?
why you
Freight
build a
earns
compressor
money.
station when you're not producing gas. That's what I don't
Yeah,
understand.
I would think you'd ship it to the west.
Well, it's shipped in a
Pipeline
world
it
market,
into the Gulf.
Yeah, Asia. There's a big Asian market.
and then this gets in the Middle East because Qatar is the major LNG producer in the world, and they've been supporting ISIS.
Well, I think
Great.
a lot of people have supported. I think the Saudis. I think there are a lot of people on the margin have been supporting. They're all going to go away, though. They're not
They're
going
going to back off of this
Yeah.
one.
I'm glad to hear you say that.
I think that's the very important thing.
Medication reminders and assisting with around-the-house responsibilities. DNA caregivers are insured and undergo background
See, if you go to his Facebook after he records this, you can watch it yourself.
Oh, we can go watch our show?
Yeah, you can go listen
Where?
to it too. You know
Where?
why
Oh, we can't listen to it?
why you'd want to do that is I have a serious.
No, I have a
question.
friend who's like playing tennis this morning. She would like to listen to this.
Right.
Oh yeah, it's recorded and played tomorrow. I think.
I never go watch
And
it.
how do you
I
go?
never
How do
listen.
I
you,
can't imagine.
how do you download?
David
Where do you
Hunter
go
gets
to?
it.
Unless
I
you're
don't do it.
doing some post research or
Bob Hunter
something, you
does it.
forgot
He goes
what
home
someone
the
said.
next
Yeah.
day and watches
Yeah.
himself. Watches us.
Well, he would.
I mean, that's really crazy.
I think so.
We're in the open. Stand by.
guys need to cheer up.
There you go.
Rhett Palmer isn't here today. It's Stanford Erickson, and I'm not so trusted as he is, the mayor of the Airways, but we have some guests that are very trusted. We have Phyllis Fry, we have Richard Kerr, and we have Bob Edsminster. And Bob is a PhD and taught as a dean in universities. What are we with our economy? What's happening right now?
At this point, the economy has been growing very, very nicely, very smoothly, despite all of the comments that you hear from time to time about, well, maybe it's not growing. The fact is, it has been growing, but at a slow rate for the last 8 years. But the last couple of quarters have been indicating maybe we're going to actually start growing better.
Why? Why is the economy starting to grow better? Because usually a business cycle, to go 8 years is a long time. So normally it would have been over by this time.
Right. It has been a long time, but it's been kept down. And a lot of fundamental factors are contributing to an expansion. We have changed how we buy everything. And some people say that the inflation rate has been kept down by the development of the internet sales force.
Yeah, it's very hard. I used to write in that area, and you take the Bureau of Statistics, Business and Statistics, and it's hard to, when they're trying to determine what inflation is, it's hard to measure that, right? It's hard to measure logistics, hard to measure how the internet's infecting, because you have old matrices, how you do that. Is that not so?
Oh, it's very difficult to measure inflation, because when they look at it, they try to adjust for the change in the product itself. So if a product has new features, okay, and costs more, they say there's no inflation. It's just additional features are being priced out into it. So somebody has to judge all those features and back that out of these inflation numbers for thousands of products that are used to determine the inflation rate. It's very, very subjective.
When I was with Business Week, I did something on machine tools, and I did a survey with economists in terms of the growth of machine tools. And China, at that time, was not part of the community. So what I did is I extrapolated what it was in 47 and what it might be in 50, in that day 60. And I created with economists, and we said it was this rate. And so we sort of, by guessing golly, we did it. Now, a year later, the government came out with what the industrial rates of growth were in the world. And my number was there. I said, my goodness, I called up the guy. I said, how'd you get that number? Well, we were quoting you. I said, oh my goodness, they're quoting me, and I created it.
And the Department of Commerce has whole staffs that work on the inflation rate, But good for you, Stan. We need you in the government. But one of the interesting situations is that every year on Thanksgiving, they look at what it costs to buy Thanksgiving dinner at Walmart. So they don't have any of these adjustments. And what they're finding is we have had a rapid inflation rate over the past 10 years.
Well, in terms of food, basic staple goods, it has gone up. But what they do is, if for you retirees to get your cost of living increase, if you're on Social Security, it's a balancing. When energy goes down, even though every other cost you have goes up, they say there's no growth in inflation.
Right. And we've had decreasing energy prices. Now, going forward, the biggest scare is that energy returns to its higher level. And that is debated every day by people who trade energy, Wall Street people and people around the world who buy and sell petroleum.
Well, that will take place because it's an oligarchy that controls it, and they'll put a damper on the growth, and right?
And we've already seen that because the cartel, OPEC, has taken 1.8 million barrels a day off of the market. That's if you include Russia as well as the OPEC.
Are we going to have a recession, Bob? Are we going to have a recession next year?
That's a $64 question, or $64,000 question, I should say. And that's what the Federal Reserve debates when they get together every 6 weeks.
Well, they're increasing the Fed funds rate. They did it a quarter. They're going to do it again, I think, September. Is that not so?
That's the intent. That's
And they're
what
also going to
signaling.
sell off some assets. How will this affect the economy?
I hope they sell off some assets because they have built
Explain
up.
what the assets are.
Okay, the Federal Reserve owns primarily U.S. government bonds and collateralized mortgage obligations. These are derivatives from the mortgage loans that have been made. And during the last 8 years, during the Obama administration, they doubled their assets. Doubled. That is to say, the Federal Reserve has been in existence for 100 years. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve. Okay? During the first 90 years, they accumulated $2 trillion, and then they added another $2 trillion in the last 8 years. So we've added in 8 years what it took 90 years to build up.
Why, I've studied economics too, and under Obama, this growth of debt is enormous. Do people not just understand what debt does to people?
I think the numbers are so big that the monetary economics is so arcane and complex that people don't understand it, and they just push it aside. Every time I try to explain it to somebody, their eyes kind of glaze over and they excuse themselves. They walk away from it.
Phyllis, does the debt bother you?
Of course it does. I
Why?
mean, it's staggering to me because we will never recoup that money. We will never pay down the debt. We will never be able to overcome it. It's something
You
that's
have compound
And Phyllis,
interest.
when you say we, it's
We-
you
exactly.
and me
The
and
taxpayer
Stan and
and your
Richard
children
and
and
all the listeners
grandchildren.
out there who are responsible for that debt at some date in the future.
it will come
Our
due,
children.
just like an asteroid. Yeah.
Grandchildren.
It is.
Well,
It's headed this way.
Richard, you've covered this, but the Soviet Union collapsed because of debt, right? It was debt that
Certainly a major factor.
a major factor. Reagan was very smart in terms of trying to make them get
They
into
spent
debt.
themselves out of into problems.
And it would appear that those supporting Mr. Obama, if they could get us into debt, that's a nice way of getting us into socialism.
Indentured
Because the
servitude.
debt creates a depression, maybe a Great Depression, to the point where that's where FDR got in and created all these social programs. Now, thank God for FDR, because he also kept, he was saving capitalism. Should I invest in the stock market today, Bob?
No, that's a separate question because stocks go up and down even when the economy is stable, because stocks are a speculation on what's going to happen in the future, and none of us know what's going to happen, so we speculate on what is going to happen.
And it's really the short time future, right? I mean, near future.
Near future.
Yeah.
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 The
Well, near future being really, in my opinion, about the next 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking even less, but yeah.
Well,
okay.
the closer you are to something, the more valuable it is,
Yeah.
so the more impact it has. So 10 years is kind of a rough number.
they call that the present value is greater
Right.
Yeah.
than the future value.
But there are some really significant risks out there. Just yesterday, we heard the European Union fined Google over $2 billion because they felt Google was overreaching its powers.
Well, if you go on to Google, and I look at Google on me, if you're an advertiser, even Amazon, if you're an advertiser, you're higher on the frequency on the page of Google or Amazon if you pay the money, if it's useful to Google. And so I can understand that in terms of the Europeans being upset with that.
Well, these social networking firms, the startups, have all been operating in an almost purely capitalistic fashion.
We will
And
be
this-
back. This is the Rhett Palmer Show. You got to go?
I do, but I wanted to ask you about what's the new currency? What will the new currency be? Is the dollar?
The dollar's going to stay there, and
It has to, doesn't it?
I really think when we get a new Federal Reserve chair next February, we're going to have a return.
Oh,
And the
I
and the
like that
interesting
answer.
thing, it's a really good answer. It's a good change. It's a good long-term change. The short-term effects are going to be very negative.
So we're going to suffer a little
Yeah,
for a while.
we are, because it's like undoing all these wrongs.
Yeah.
You know, it's going to be tough.
To
on
tighten our
people.
belts.
Yeah.
Well, we're old enough and strong enough to do
And
that.
doing
We've endured
wrong.
worse. Goodness knows.
Like
Stan,
what?
I want to thank you,
Oh, thank
for
you.
having me here. I was so pleased to meet you both.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you for all of
Phyllis,
your.
it's been great.
Well, it sounds like you're the one that
Experience
really
and-
makes a difference. We don't
Stay
make any
tuned.
difference.
No.
Stay tuned.
She's out there every
Yes, she
day.
does.
I'm fighting the city council. I'm fighting these regionalists.
Oh, and
see
to
what
stop the
happens.
choo-choo, my gosh.
That's finished. We'll see what Japan does with
You know, I
choo-choo
mean, they're
and
pouring
truck.
these trains across our grade crossings all the time. And some of those grade crossings are the access to the hospital.
Yeah, no, it's a nightmare for us. And
It'd be different if
not
they
to
said we're
mention
gonna
the
build overpasses for all the railroad. That would have been a different story.
Well, they could have done that. That could have been the proposal.
They didn't propose it.
No,
They
they
didn't want to
didn't.
spend the money.
No, they should have. I mean, if they were going to do it, they should have moved the whole railroad to the west.
that's
Yep.
what we rallied for. And it could
Exactly.
have been done. The government could have,
But this is the time to
they could
move
have
it to the
floated
west
some
because there's not
bonds.
much out there besides gators.
There's nothing there.
And that's true high-speed rail.
It's all
Maybe-
owned by the
now-
Mormons.
Yeah.
Now we know that the Japanese now own Fortress, which is the parent company to all the railroad.
Ah.
So they are the
Japanese own
experts
it.
at high-speed rail
Uh-huh.
and also high-density development. So it's a
Sorry,
big,
you can't
huge
keep with us. Okay.
here.
Thank you, Phyllis.
Have a good day.
Rush, does Rhett listen to us?
Does Rhett listen?
Does he listen to us?
I don't think so. If Brett's not involved, he doesn't. He's like David Hunter. He listens for himself.
I bet you're right. I'd put money on it.
Any sort of safety product around your pool, give us a call.
Does this? Let me see one of those pads over there to see if it has.
Okay,
that
so she
green-
left?
Yeah.
Okay, so I won't turn her mic up then.
Thank you.
Okay.
Be safe around the pool. Always have supervision. Nothing replaces a
Oh,
dump
no, that's
supervision.
what I was
Put the
looking
safety
for.
products in place.
That's.
Culinary pool servicing, and that phone number is 778-3633. Hello, Rhett talking. Al's Auto Restaurant.
Would you go into? Most people don't understand what the Federal Reserve is. Would you go a little bit?
Yeah,
how,
that's a-
why it was created and what's its purpose and how now it's overstepped its purpose, as I understand it.
That's a tall order.
Okay.
Okay, sure.
And most people don't understand the Federal Reserve.
I don't.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I.
Well, that's
I
what
mean,
you
I-
guys saying. It's so complex for most people to understand. Now, I've studied it.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent a semester studying just
When
the
I was
Federal
editor of the
Reserve.
Journal of Commerce, I assigned a reporter to cover the Fed, and everybody said,
Yeah.
"Why are you covering the Fed?" I said, "The Fed's the most important." Since New York Times doesn't cover it, Wall Street Journal doesn't cover it, why should you cover it on a daily basis? I said, "That's why we're covering it."
Yeah. You know, I was actually shown my office if I'd gone to work for the Federal Reserve. And that's one of my great regrets. I should have taken that job.
Service to Asheville, North Carolina on Elite Airways free
Because I would have had worked for all three of the federal agencies.
Regional Airport. Land near the
Oh, well.
sand. This is John Oliver of Oliver's Plumbing. I want to thank you for making our plumbing
Well,
business
I read
successful.
Jackal Island. I read all that. Was it J.P. Morgan that helped create the Federal
This is
Reserve?
the last spot. Stand by.
I think
Rejoin us next.
I read all that, but you don't have to go into that.
Yeah, it's too much.
For fast service, call 560.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you, what is the Fed? And most people don't understand. Hi, we were talking to Bob Edminster, and he is a PhD economist and dean of school, college. What is the Federal Reserve? Why was it created? What's its purpose? Most people don't understand that.
Well, first of all, let me say that in your wallet, you have the Federal Reserve. I'm holding in my hand a $1 bill, and at the top it says Federal Reserve Note. Federal Reserve Note. That dollar is issued or is backed by the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve Bank was created so that you could have paper money. It's called fiat money.
It was in the early 1900s.
It was 100 years ago,
Yes.
almost to the date. And it was created out of World War I
Because what?
because we felt we needed to have fiat money, a stable currency, and we had to get off of the gold standard. It used to be people paid for things with coins, gold coins, silver coins, but there's a lot of problem with trying to transact business with physical gold, and the variability of the value changes. So we established the Federal Reserve to provide stability to the system.
Now, now what does it do? How does it do that? Most people don't understand its function. I mean, they understand now that part, but how does it operate to keep the economy working?
The Federal Reserve has compulsory powers that it can use to influence interest rates, and the interest rates affect economic activity. Because if a business wants to drill another hole in the ground, build an office building, build a social networking site, they're going to have to go out and borrow the money. And the question, what's going to be the price of that money? The Federal Reserve has a big influence on the price of money.
How did we keep the interest rate over the last 8 years, 1%, less than 1%?
Yeah, how do we make it ridiculously low?
Yes.
Very easy. The Federal Reserve has the power to create more of these $1 bills, okay? And even not beyond paper money, it has the right to create electronic money. And so it can flood the economy with a lot of money, and so that drives down the rate of interest.
Well, I covered as a journalist, I covered the internet revolution, and most of the internet people were very upset because the Federal Reserve told the banks not to give money to the internet people. They're trying to develop so the internet people had to get IPOs, they had to go and get in vulture capitalists to finance them. And so there just was not enough currency in an economy that was growing so much. And then the minute when the vulture capitalists won their money back, they created the internet debacle, and that's when we had the recession. That was my experience in covering that. Does that make sense? He's thinking about it.
Yeah, I got to think about that.
See, if the banks would not give the money to the internet people,
right? Because
so now private people, and the private people are even worse than the Federal Reserve. When they want your money back, they want it now, today.
The private banks are very careful with their investments, and they're intended to be. And there are regulatory agencies, including the Federal Reserve, that demand that the banks be very careful about how they invest their money. The internet startups are highly risky, and they're not really appropriate for bank lending. So you have to go to a different market for that money.
Well, when I was writing on that, they used to say, well, the automobile industry was highly risky at one time too, but the banks supported the automobile and invested a lot into the automobile industry because they could see it. I mean, they saw the car and just they measured things like you see a house. It's tangible. The internet was not tangible, so they couldn't see it. And so when it went away, it went away.
And you don't understand how it makes money.
And yes.
Well, we're beginning to see how they make money.
Yeah.
Basically, you have
subscribers,
advertising, but the advertising is so much better with the internet because you can prove that somebody clicked and bought something, and the people that run the clicking, okay, the Googles of the world, charge roughly $15 per click. You can make a lot of money at $15 a click.
Yeah, but a lot of people don't understand that. If you go to Pakistan and you hire these people, they'll do a lot of clicks for you for a cheap amount of money. So you get a lot of clicks out of Pakistan. They don't buy anything.
Well, let me ask Bob a question. We're talking about finances. They're talking about pulling currency out now, and that it's becoming digital, or at least there's a threat. You hear this. Somebody advertised on the radio said this is a major threat to the. They're pulling currency out, is going away, and it's becoming digital. What are they talking about?
Well, most of the currency already is digital because our bank account
you just don't
has
move
no
money around.
paper behind it. In fact, we don't even record people's ownership on paper.
Well, why
anymore.
is that? Would that be a threat? Doesn't seem to me that.
I don't understand why they consider it a threat. This is a natural evolution.
Yeah. Okay.
It used to be the banker is the one who actually held your gold coins in a trunk for you, okay, and it had your name on the trunk, okay, and so we've evolved all the way to the point where you're just another record in a memory bank.
Well, Mrs. Yeltsin, who's the chairperson of the Federal Reserve, says the banks now are the most secure they've been in like 20 years. Well, there are fewer of them now, too, because...
Oh, I think the banks are highly secure these days. And the reason is that the failure in 2008 scared everybody so much that the bank regulators came and said, you need more capital, that is more equity, and you need to be more careful about what loans you make. And in fact, they were so careful that you can barely get a mortgage loan to buy a new home these days.
Oh yeah, we're doing a home equity just to have the money. I always believe in having home equity just to have the money, and not going to invest in anything just in case. And I did this like 10 years ago, and I did it in 2 days. Today it has taken 6 weeks, and I don't have any debt. I don't have any debt. I have no mortgage, no debt. It's taking 6 weeks. And I'm saying, why does it take so long? Well, it has to go through this, it has to go through, then it has to go to, then you finally have to get the real committee to look at it. So the stages. We're going to come back. We're also going to talk about how Mr. Trump is doing today. Okay. Let's
Clear
go.
on nose.
Yeah.
Was this a good prop, do you
Yeah.
think?
Oh,
was good.
yeah, it's great. And
That
the
was good.
seat on there, too.
Yeah, that was good.
It brings it close to home. It's on your butt.
I think that's the way you need to talk about it too, quite honestly. Otherwise, people kind of get their eyes.
They don't
glaze
realize
over.
how close the Fed is.
Yeah, my eyes glaze over when I talk about the Fed.
Yeah. And the Fed uses that to do what it wants to do. I have an op-ed piece which I haven't been able to get published, but it shows that Janet Yellen, in testimony before congressional committee, so it's a sworn testimony, right, is using the Fed as a taxing authority. And that was never approved in any of the Federal Reserve legislation. It would be like the CIA overreaching beyond your powers. You know what your powers are. Well, the Fed has gone beyond its powers dramatically.
Yeah, that's the problem.
You're gonna have to wear your headphones to hear me.
Yeah, I'll do it like
Okay.
this. I'll
All
do
right.
it like this.
What are we doing?
Mr. B was on vacation, so I'm going to begin by saying, before we get back to big thoughts, Mr. B, who runs everything, was on vacation. And so we are sort of winging it for a while.
Good.
We were very fortunate. Mr. B, what'd you do on your vacation? Just to get him
Good.
done.
Okay.
And then he's going to go back and say something nice about Trump so we can get back into talking about.
Well, I'll say as much as I can as a Democrat can say about Mr. Trump.
Well, whatever. Whatever you want to say. Whatever you want to say. You can do that. Whatever you want to do.
There you go.
You say what you say, Mr. V. You need a token Democrat every once in a while.
That's right. Got to keep you guys honest. And Phil did a good job.
He did a great job.
Yeah.
His background is spectacular.
Oh yeah, I know. That's why I'm not going to have to train you too much. Just
No.
where everything is.
By the way, I talked to Joni briefly again yesterday about her experiences with the YWCA, and she was she was employed by Fidelity Investments, and her charitable efforts include supporting the YWCA, and she ended up being chairman of a YWCA that went into bankruptcy. And so we've been looking at this, and we need to have lunch with her sometime and bring her out.
Okay.
I asked her if she's given speeches on this. She has not. So we got somebody who's kind of a neophyte in this, but she speaks very well.
Let's go to lunch. Because we need a woman.
I know, and she's strong enough. Her voice is good. She would come across well.
What other areas do you want to talk about in terms of the? We did the Sunnis. The resistance movement.
I think it might be worth talking about to what degree is it. I mean, is it losing its umph? Is it beginning to be its own worst enemy, or is it going to continue?
Let's do the resistance movement.
That's probably worth doing.
Yeah. A lot of people are interested in that, and
well, the fact that you have a resistance movement means that they don't have a positive agenda.
That's right. It's resist.
And I think that
That's
would be a
make
good
that
point
point.
to make.
make that point. I think that's what people are discovering.
And to support our most vulnerable neighbors when they need a hand up most. Longer term, your generosity.
You might think of another subject altogether.
What?
Trying to think of a different, totally different.
Okay.
Education, financial
What do you think?
stability, and health of area residents. The United Way builds partnerships, forges consensus, and leverages resources in order to advance the common good. They want to see all Indian River County residents have a quality education that leads to a stable job, enough income to support a family through retirement, and good health. You've helped them strive
haven't
towards that
talked about
success. Thank you for your generous
Well,
donations.
Well, one of the
and let's
questions
all live
that
united.
keeps coming up is
Indian River County
the
Habitat for
European
Humanity
Union
Restore
going to
is
survive?
always a
Yeah.
hub of activity,
And
especially with
there are
the
economic
building
reasons it's not going to
But it
survive,
takes teamwork to bring in new
Political
donations,
reasons.
but there are
to
political
stock the
and
warehouse,
and
prepare
social
them for
reasons,
sale,
too.
place them in
Yeah,
their
you might want to talk
respective
about the
departments,
Europe,
and then
about
keep
Europe,
customers coming
EU,
back.
and whether
Friends,
it'll
Survival of
the
the
whole
EU.
Brexit issue and
Yeah,
Wow, I think May is gone in about 6 months.
You think so?
Oh yeah.
Well, boy, she's got a weak party in
And
the.
she's a weak person. You got to be a leader.
The alternatives, though, are not. She doesn't have. There's not a good alternative to her.
I know.
So she may.
I
stay-
think they'll let her do Brexit, and then they'll find somebody else.
Okay, yeah, and then put it on her neck.
Of course, and I think she knows
Then they
that.
can cut off the head.
No, I think she
Okay.
understands that.
That's a good point.
She's a sacrificial lamb.
Okay.
Well, there's not,
I think you're absolutely right.
not
I never thought
anybody
of it.
very strong behind her, though. And I see.
But someone will rise up. They always do.
When your alliance is with the Ireland
Okay, this is the last
party,
spot. The
that
open
keep
is
you
next.
afloat.
Okay.
Protestant
And-
island.
Then I'm going to have you
Yeah.
speak, Mr. P.
Well, they're
No, because they got the Scots now all in together. Because they
they've,
give Northern Ireland some money, they didn't give to the Scots.
they've always had trouble with the Scots. They're a pain in the ass.
Except on the Scots.
So much. I always thought they
We've
should.
always been a pain in the ass.
Yes, they have. Terrible, terrible thing.
Here, if you want to hear what he's saying, you have to lift this up. Don't put it over your ear because it has been cleaned.
You're still having your ear
And then
problem,
when
I
you through,
think.
go down. Well, this is the 8th day. They
We
said,
need to have wipes.
I know we need wipes.
That's all, the box of wipes.
Radio, Rhett Palmer, the mayor of the airwaves.
Hey, it's Stanford Erickson, another blessed day in terms of paradise here for Rhett Palmer. And the phone's going, these things are going bad, but Mr. B is back from vacation. We've missed Mr. B. You get the feedback, Mr. B?
Yes, I'm glad to be back.
Put your two down. Yeah, put yours down. Yeah. Where'd you go? You went to Russia or Venezuela? Yeah, Mr. B is our token Democrat, so
San Francisco.
It wasn't as exotic as that. I went to Newington, Connecticut.
oh, well that's close to Venezuela. Senator Blumenthal, right?
Newington, Connecticut is the home of my daughter and my two grandsons, 8 and 6. So
Oh,
let me tell you, I'm
Oh, they wore you out, huh?
But it's also the home of ARRL, and I'm a ham radio operator, so I had a real treat. The CEO of ARRL headquarters took myself and the PR manager to lunch.
Do people still do ham radios across the world? I mean,
Yes, we do. We just had a big field day this past weekend with ARRL across the country as ham radio operators, and we made contact with 45 out of the 50 states.
wow.
And one territory, and about 300 contacts between 2 p.m. Saturday and 2 p.m. Sunday.
Well, with social media, doesn't that sort of cut into the young people now do social media and not do ham radios, right?
It's a hobby. So I do social media, but you know, you just can't get the talking together. I mean, when you're on Facebook, you're typing. When we're on ham radio, we're talking to a live person.
Yeah, and I can understand that. You get a sense of the personality more than if it was being typed in there. Now,
Speaking about personalities, we've got some great personalities in Washington now. And they're going, the token Democrat here at the station won't go any further but saying, I'm just enjoying the whole free-for-all.
okay. Thank you, Mr. B. We'll get back to our guests here. We have Richard Curl, the former deputy director of the CIA, who lives in Vero Beach here. We have Bob Minster, who a dean of a school, PhD in economics here in, where do you live?
In Vero Beach.
Oh, the county, as I do. You live in Vero Beach County, yes.
Indian River County.
Oh, Indian River County, pardon me. But you're in Vero Beach.
Right, I live
You're still by
on
tax,
the
by
island.
Yeah. We're talking about what's happening in Washington right now. How do you, Richard, how do you see what's happening in terms of the Supreme Court now sort of permitted the ban? And if you see the headlines, it says limited. Well, it's about 80% of what he wanted, he got. It's not very limited. He got the majority he wanted, but every headline I said, the limited ban. You know,
exactly right. You know, as usual, they played down the victory. I mean, what he didn't get were things that he really wasn't expecting to get, and they had largely already excluded, which was relatives, agreements that had been made earlier with universities, of somebody coming. So I mean, it was essentially he got the ban.
You know, he's won. He's achieved a lot of things from my point of view. I mean, in terms of the Supreme Court nominee that he got, he's turning out all right. If you're a Republican, you're pretty happy with Mr. Gorsuch. He was the one that said on the ban that they should even made it tougher. He was one of three justices of the Supreme Court that said it should have been a tougher. Don't impinge on the president at all. So he's gotten that. He's deregulated a lot of our industries. He's gotten something through the House on the health care. The Senate, they're working towards that. He said it was mean, so he's on the House bill. So he's influencing. I see him influencing a lot. And when I turn on CNN and I read the Washington Post, which I do, the New York Times, which I do, you think that it was chaos. It's in disarray.
Yeah, I think the resistance is what they call it too, which is a good point. I think it's it's beginning to wear on people, and I think people generally are beginning to get a little tired of the resistance and the negativity. Many of the things he's doing are quite logical and sensible. You know, from the beginning, my attitude was, and I've mentioned this on air before, and that is, don't listen so much to what he says, and don't pay that much attention to his tweets. He's doing that primarily to rile up the press, but pay attention to what he's doing, and he's doing a lot of things below the threshold of what the news is reporting. And you mentioned regulations, but it's a lot of legislation is being drafted that are making changes and some financial changes that are going to be important, I think, in the long run. So all in all, I think he's doing well, and as I said, I think the resistance is wearing thin, and people are getting tired of it.
Well, Mister, what do you think?
Yeah, well, think about resistance as the major theme of the Democrat Party, right? They need to have a positive theme out there, and to use a negative theme is going to be self-defeating long term.
Well, I could tell that to my wife because there's a lot of resistance in my home. That's a negative thing, right? I don't see any positive. You know,
I know you're joking.
Yeah, no, I am joking.
Careful,
Careful.
on air, Stanford.
Yeah, your wife listens to the show.
Sometimes. Well, she listens when I'm not there sometimes. She's already heard me. So that's why I like you two gentlemen speaking up. In terms of, I wrote a column in the press journal called that Trump is transforming the United States. And I thought the reason I voted for him, I thought we needed to be transformed because I thought Mr. Obama was taking us, maybe he didn't know, but I think he really knew, but I think most of us didn't know where he was taking us. He was really destroying what I call the social and economic mobility of the country. Is that as you gentlemen see it?
Yeah, I've read your op-ed piece. It's very good, and I think our listeners want to read it too. And the reason is that fundamental cultural beliefs of American people were not being represented by the leader, the president, with Obama. And so they were looking for a transformational agent, somebody who would come in and disrupt things. And to say the least, Donald Trump has disrupted American politics.
Yeah, Richard, and I know you worked for George H.W. Bush, but if the normal Republicans got in, I don't think there would have been the attempt to bring this transformation. I don't think they.
No, I think they would have administered the system the way it was essentially and let it drift, maybe making some changes on the margin. But I don't think they had the courage. Maybe that's not the word, but had the instincts to do what Trump has done. I mean, he really believes the country is exceptional, and President Obama did not believe it was exceptional. He did not believe.
He even said, all countries think they're exceptional.
That's right.
That was his response when they asked, do you think the country's exceptional? He said, all countries think they're exceptional.
Do you think the Romans told their people, we're not important, we're not really the most important country or the people in the world? Do you think they really said that to their people, the emperors, to gather behind them to do what they did? Or that anybody that's really moving something says, oh, well, you're not very important. You're just like everybody else. Your culture is no better, no worse.
Well, I felt that Mr. Obama really thought that, too.
I think he did believe that.
Well, look at who is resisting in the Senate the Obamacare repeal. It is the more conservative people who are saying the new bill is not a full withdrawal from Obamacare.
Well, I think once you give entitlements to people, it's very hard to take them away.
Yes.
Especially we're a republic, but it's also a democracy, and hard to take them away.
This is a major battle. There's no doubt about it.
We'll be back discussing world affairs.
What's a subject we have not talked about on air?
Europe again. Europe. We'll go to Europe next. Let's go to leadership and then Europe, because I want to read a poem I wrote on JFK. And JFK, this is his centennial. So I think John F. Kennedy, what anybody ever thought was a leader. I thought
absolutely
people felt.
This is 50 years?
It's 100 years. Oh, it's 50 years. It's the bicentennial.
Bicentennial.
No, it's 100 years from his birth.
Yes.
100 years from his birth.
Yes.
Centennial.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it's 100 years from his birth.
Right.
Well, I don't know about you, but when he came into office, when he was running in 1960, I found him so exciting
I did too.
as a young
I think most people.
a young
and-
college
and-
student
and I think
or a graduate student.
I think we've had that.
Well,
the
how
far
many-
left had the same feeling on Obama.
How many years has it been since he was assassinated?
Well, 60.
Yeah, it was
It was
63.
63,
Yeah.
this is 17.
Yeah.
See, it's about 50, it's more than 50 years, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So he.
I mean, that's what people remember, that's
Yeah.
the reason I was thinking
I
that would
know,
be a
but
more
this
important
is
date than his
centennial in
birth
terms
date.
of his birth.
Yeah.
But I want to get into leadership, and then let's go into Europe. Okay.
First Presbyterian Church of Vero Beach. We would welcome you if you're looking for a church home. We have great music, we have a great congregation, lots of wonderful men and women. We are located at
Why don't you encourage a couple people to call in?
the corner of
Any of you people out there have any views about any of this?
Well, you gotta have a system for,
No,
You don't think they
it's
can-
hard for Mr.
Oh,
B to
okay.
deal with. That's why he hasn't done it, because Mr. B's trying to do all this.
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
You need
I
a
think-
separate
you
person.
need a
yeah,
separate
that's
person.
why you need a system and
Do
a
you?
process. Because you don't want just anybody getting on the air.
Yeah,
You have to have a screener.
Somebody has to screen them. Yeah.
Yeah, you'll get nutties.
Oh my gosh, yes.
yeah. When I've done that, and,
No, that's a good point.
and they have a 3-second
Delay, right?
delay.
Yeah.
If they say anything wrong,
Beep them out, yeah. It takes a whole.
No, that's a good point.
system to do.
But you know, if he's going to be he needs that.
I agree, but that costs money.
562-3002-562.
But he's always, he complains about not having.
Plastic bottles, jugs, and
I know.
containers is a good thing. But thin plastic wraps,
Because when
plastic
these people
shopping
go on
bags,
the
and
air,
hoses should never be
they're
placed
your
in your
best
recycling
advocates.
Of course, he does
When our
this on the cheap.
recyclables are sent to the
Gets us
material
in the
recovery
pot.
facility,
That's right.
these
We don't
items
do
get
that.
jammed up in the
We should be
machinery.
charging him $1,500 a day.
Throw
That's
hoses
right.
of thin plastic wraps in the garbage and return plastic shopping bags to a collection bin at a local grocery store.
But I wouldn't
Learn
spend
more
too
about
much time
recycling
getting
in
your
any
bill
river county.
prepared.
Visit us at ircrecycles.com.
I didn't enjoy doing it. I wouldn't do it.
Indian River Walking Clinic Miracle Mile has been a sponsor of this
Sometimes I find 3 hours.
I would like to,
testing.
I would like to be able to write down
You'll get the right care
the site where I can go and bring this back up.
a young grandson.
oh, it's Rhett Palmer Facebook.
Facebook.
Yeah, it's on
Oh, it's on
Facebook.
Facebook.
It's on, but it's also on iHeart on radio, but it's Facebook on television, because he's on YouTube.
Oh, he is.
Yeah,
You're on YouTube.
Oh,
right
so
now.
I can find this on YouTube then.
it's right here.
Danny House, president of East Coast Tax and Financial Planning.
Last spot, stand by.
Okay.
See, that's us.
Thursday, 10:30 a.m. to 11.
Right, I see it there, but I didn't know how to look it up. I go to YouTube, type in Rhett Palmer.
You are listening to the mayor of the airwaves.
It's not the mayor, it's Stanford Erickson, and the mayor will be here shortly, next week, I believe. This is the centennial of John F. Kennedy, his birth, and I wrote a poem when he died, the day he died, and I read it because we're talking about leadership to some degree in Mr. Trump. But John F. Kennedy struck me as a strong leader. Often we have sat the night and watched the stars go by. At first they come, one by one, each steps forward, kneels, and kisses the forehead of the night with little bits of light. Then, in a blinking of an eye, many stars dot the sky. When the pale fingers of day silently make their way through the fading night, and nip between their tips each flickering light, our grief secures an odd relief, for the broad back of day portends the bright array. There's a time, was a time, will always be a time when, as we sit at night, a twinkling star will dance upon our eyes, pirouette lightly to our sides, and with grace and charm to the very heights of the heavens climb. The innocent follow each of its steppings in the skies with gleeful prophecies of omnipotence. Those suckled on the pointed breasts of pride envy that sparkling sight. The grave, those who know the signs, are the stars' allies. When with much delight we begin to laud that flight, parchments of our eyes mark it with vicarious delight. Suddenly our shouts are stripped to a single denuded cry. Our distant hope, our rising joy is stopped by a single smite. Down, down it streaks our falling star, streams its blazing trail, pushes black, further back, black into the night. a trail mimicked by our scalding tears, washes our cold veneers, tears that taste from years of strutting thoughts stale. Days pass before we sit and watch the night, but every time one cries a bit of our sadness dies, and then as we sit we begin to see what God is like. He is the night lit up by little bits of light. I wrote that because I thought JFK, whatever your belief, and I really wasn't political at the time, he was a leader, and our nation he was a leader when our nation needed a leader. Richard, did you feel that at the time?
Oh, absolutely. I was in graduate school in 1960, and he came to the town, to Eugene, Oregon, University of Oregon, and actually I went to a speech that he gave in a high school. And he was inspiring. He was a young, excited person, articulate, bright, clever, humorous. I found him very, very attractive, and someone, and you know, for a number of years thereafter, people, the Peace Corps and the things that he was talking about, the space program. I mean, he had his own problems politically. Not long after he got in office, and I was at the CIA, then he had the Bay of Pigs and the problem of the invasion of the attempted overthrow of Castro, a disaster, poorly advised, poorly chosen. But he made his way through it. You know, he made his way, and he admitted early on it was a mistake. I found him. I thought, in the end, by the time he had finished before he was assassinated, I had begun to worry about him in terms of what the future was going to hold for him, because I wondered about whether he would really end up truly being a great president because of his actions, or a great president because he was a unique, dynamic personality.
Bob, what did you think about JFK?
Well, I still remember being in the library studying at that point and hearing about his death, assassination, and you never forget that day. It was a really crucial day, and tears come to your eyes just thinking back about that period, because he was a great man. A great leader.
Yeah, I was in graduate school too. I was walking to my class, and people were running towards me, and they said, the president has been shot, and classes are dismissed. So I went home, turned on the television, and you just kept the television on all the time until you just discovered that he died. And I remember Walter Cronkite announcing that he died. It's an interesting thing in Dan Rather in terms of journalism. Dan Rather was one with this at that time, UPI, and it was Associated Press, and they always were rivals. And Dan Rather heard from a nurse that the president had died, so he ran to the pay telephone. The Associated Press person ran after him. He called the UPI, and they were the one that gave it to the television, so Dan Rather won that. And then he took the phone and ripped out the phone. So the Associated Press could not. Now that's what I call journalism.
That's old-fashioned
That's
journalism.
old. Well, I covered Washington, and you have journalists like that today. But Bob, in terms of the president we have now, we need leadership. I mean, the country sorely needs leadership. I think everybody understood that when President Obama said he drew the red line and then backed off the red line. And it was a demarcation in terms of our really understanding that we didn't have leadership. Is that not so? I mean, I think that's why we hungered for a leader this time.
And we do need a strong leader at this point. And maybe we actually have a stronger leader, maybe an individual who has a stronger core than we're giving President Trump credit for at this point. History sometimes revises this viewpoint from what it is when you live through it. And we look back at it, maybe we'll see this was transformational.
People are fearful that he's a leader like Hitler was a leader. I just can't comprehend that. I mean, you see that all the time. You see Jake Trapper, who I thought was a very good journalist, and on air said the president is unhinged. President Trump is unhinged. No anchor would say, Walter Cronkite would never have said that. And that CNN now has had to fire 3 very respected journalists because they used a one-source story, didn't clear it with anybody at CNN, and it was wrong. It was misinformation. It was fake news. And CNN finally had to fire. These are very respected journalists, but this need to break a story quickly that denigrates the president is so apparent, so needful for the journalists. Richard, in terms of Trump, your view as a leader, what do you think?
You know, I think he's being I would agree with Bob. I think it's going to take a while to understand. We'll have to look back at him before we truly understand him, I think. But I think he is not someone who acts without thinking the actions through. He speaks sometimes without thinking, and he does his sends out these tweets, I think. But I think a lot of those tweets are just aimed at tantalizing people and irritating them, which he can do rather well. He knows how to get the goat and to get attention and to get the press reacting to him. Most of the time, they spend reacting to things that are not very important.
Oh, the press is so focused on Trump every day, everything he does. Well, that's what you want to do if you're a leader, is to have people watching you. So he's using the modern technology of the tweet to get that.
Well, we'll be back, and we're going to talk about Europe next in terms of what's happening there. Okay. Now we have, you can get up and walk around if you want. We have 5 minutes.
I'd like to get up a little.
Yeah.
I get
5 minutes.
sore.
No, it was when I was apolitical. Those
You know,
days.
I get up and I go, but I mean, I played tennis yesterday. I played tennis like 3 or 4 times a week. And I don't understand how I get so stiff just sitting in a chair.
Well, I'm the same way. Just sitting is terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, not moving. You all those weld together. Pretty soon you're kind of.
Well, as we get older, I have to take a lot of potassium because I do a lot of exercise.
Oh, you
call,
do? Yeah, you must.
And they have me taking 3.
That's what Gatorade is.
Yeah, well, I do that, but and when I was younger, I didn't have to do anything like that.
So, what are we going to pick up?
We're going to
now?
go on Europe in terms of what's going to happen in terms of May and the
EU.
EU.
I'd like to mention Italy here.
Okay.
Because the Italians just went through a bunch of mayoral elections,
Yes.
and the center right won them over the center left.
Really?
Yes.
In Italy?
In Italy, yes.
That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. It was just announced.
I don't know
day or two
anything
ago.
about Italian politics.
But it's very crucial because if there is a country that's going to leave next, it's most likely to be Italy.
Is that right?
Bring that up. Yeah, that's interesting. I have a take on Italy I can do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no take on Italy.
Have you been there?
I've been to
Oh, I've
Italy.
been there.
and
I
I've
love
dealt
Italy.
with the
Everybody
Italians.
loves Italy.
Rome, I didn't. That was the first time I'd been there last year. First time ever I've been, and I'd been on business in Milan once and went back, and so I didn't know anything.
Milan's dull.
Yeah, but yeah, it's like Montreal. I mean, like
Baltimore.
Ottawa.
Ottawa or Toronto, or
Toronto.
It's not interesting, but I just loved Rome.
Rome
I thought,
is-
of
well-
all the cities, I've been to all the major cities. Rome's the number one city.
Is that right?
Oh, I love
Most people
I
like
like-
Florence the best of all.
I've never been to Florence.
Well, I like
Florence
Venice.
is great,
I
yeah.
do like Venice too.
I'm-
Although
well, I
Venice,
thought
Well,
Paris
Venice
was
is
mine.
like Venice, California.
wearing
It's
out.
it's a strange place. Yeah.
Yeah. it wears on you, but it's interesting.
Venice, California is strange. Have you ever been to Venice?
Yes, I have.
Those are strange people.
Yeah.
Yes, they are.
Yeah, it's California.
I have good friends living in Venice. I thought that's from another planet.
Yeah. Along the walk. Go along the walk.
Drinking the wine. And,
The
weren't you-
weightlifters and the
Oh.
nudists and it's like going to a circus.
yes.
I was impressed with the rebuilding that's going on in Rome.
Okay.
Did you notice that when you were there?
Yeah.
Yes, everything was
I-
being
Okay. Well, that has not happened for 50 years.
Well, bring that up in there.
Okay.
No, it's. I loved Italy.
Right.
I love the
Right.
Italians. The Italians are delightful people.
Yeah.
You go to Paris and the French really could care less about you.
Mm-hmm.
You get the Italians; they're absolutely considerate of you. You know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get outside of Paris, it's all right.
No, outside without a doubt.
Paris is something else.
Oh, it is. It's like New York City
Paris,
in a way.
yeah.
Well,
I don't like New York City either, I
Yeah.
admit, at all.
You know, the British are sort of detached from you too. Once you go to a pub,
Unless you go up country or someplace
country, the normal British people.
or go down long. There are any number of places. I usually go to Scotland, and you're Scottish too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I like the Scots, although they're difficult people. They're a difficult people to
Oh,
start
they
with.
live in a difficult environment up there. Good God.
The best investors are the Scots and the Dutch. I mean, that's when I was covering international business. If a Scot or a Dutch was involved, everybody said, "Okay, we know no one will cheat. They'll count every penny."
I was on a Dutch board, or a company owned by the Dutch, and I tell you, it was a difficult time.
They are.
They are hard to deal with,
They are hard to deal with.
and you would understand this. It was a company that was foreign owned but did business in the U.S. Defense area. So it has this interesting kind of complex board that you have to put in place. And I was on a board with a real wonderful group of John White from the Defense Department, and Dave Jeremiah, former deputy chairman or vice chairman, and a couple other people. The Dutch could not believe that they couldn't tell us what to do.
Oh yeah, no.
And we were running the company. We said, you don't understand it. You own the company. The only thing the board can't do is sell it without your permission. But we made all the other decisions.
Let's go into
They finally
Europe,
got
and then I'd like to go into education. You've been in education. Why is our educational system creating these secular progressives? I mean, why is that? Let's go into
That's a heavy
education a little
question.
bit, because we did graduate school, all this kinds of stuff, and how do you change this education? So, I mean, it's almost disruptive to what's happening.
Yeah, it really is.
The
And
change
that's
is
where the
actually
resistance
coming,
movement-
the change that has occurred has come from within. And there are some universities that have been established in the last couple of decades which do not have a liberal arts component. Okay,
They're technical.
they're technical.
Yeah.
Business, engineering, they're technical areas. And these universities are growing like
Well, let's
Crazy.
go.
That's a good point.
Let's go into that a little bit.
okay,
But let's go into Europe right now.
yeah, yeah.
Richard, you would start in terms of what's happening in Europe, Germany, and then go into Italy. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
Let Bob start, because
Okay.
he probably knows more about Europe than I do. I mean, I can speak to it, but I think
Okay.
you're probably more knowledgeable
Okay.
than I am.
And I'd like to mention a fundamental issue, and I'll talk about that too.
okay.
I'll weigh in when.
Okay.
Again, 569-4714.
The tide is in. Whether it be a special event, romantic dinner, or a great night out, it is sure to be a memorable event at the Tides Restaurant. Chef Kelleher's latest innovations, always an award-winning culinary experience. You'll taste the freshest seafood, locally grown, organically raised vegetables, and the
We're sitting on
finest
the
meats
tennis
to
deck
create
talking about the
masterful
Tides
presentations
yesterday.
of both flavor and
They
form.
have
A complete
summer
dining
specials that are
experience to meet all your
fantastic, and they're
expectations.
priced
The
so low.
Tides Restaurant.
Only
You can't
problem with
believe
the
it.
restaurant, it's such a crowded little place.
Indian River
Yeah, but they are so flexible the way
They are good.
move through the economy.
This is the last spot.
seasonal.
Your open is next.
Okay.
Right here, right now. Recently had a family member came to town, a young grandson. Turned out he had strep throat. We found out right away because we sent him to Indian River Walk-in Clinic at Miracle Mile. And everything was correct. He came out well. He's doing fine now, I'm happy to say. Indian River Walk-in Clinic. The right care, right now, Miracle Mile. And now, the most trusted name in radio, Rhett Palmer, the mayor of the airwaves.
Hi, it's Stanford Erickson. I'm in for Rhett Palmer, and I hope you're having fun. Our guests are very informative, and we've discussed over the last 3 hours various aspects of the world, but we haven't touched on Europe. Bob Edminster, who PhD economist, dean of schools. What's happening to Europe? What's going to happen between the UK trying to separate itself from the European market, and does that mean the disintegration of the European market at some point?
The Brexit vote really shocked the European Union. They thought it was going to be
That's a
defeated.
British vote to separate. Yes.
Yes. So when the British decided that they would separate completely from the European Union, and by the way, keep in mind that even though Britain was part of the European Union, it continued to have its own currency. All of the other states in the European Union used the euro. So Britain
That was
never
very smart of
fully a part
Mrs.
of
Thatcher, wasn't it? I mean,
Brilliant.
That was a brilliant move by Mrs. Thatcher.
And she saw what is a crucial element here, and that is the currency of the European Union is extremely unique. The currency of the United States is backed by the full faith and credit and taxing power of the United States government. But the euro has no counterpart in that. So the euro is established by a collection of states, Germany, Italy, other kinds of states, without that full backing by the people, the taxpayers.
Well, it's hard to tax that way. True, isn't it? Because, I mean, you get various economies that are not as strong, and then ultimately Germany sort of dominates the economy. Isn't that what's happening?
Well, the German economy and the German people are definitely behind the euro, okay? And the other states which are weaker are really not able to support the euro. And so those people who engage in world commerce have to decide what kind of currency they're going to use when they do contracting. Do you want the currency of the euro, which is not backed up by the full faith and credit of every country? Or do you want to have the dollar, which is backed up by the full faith and credit of everybody in the United States, irrespective of whether they live in Florida or Maryland or some other state?
Well, I've been reading a book on the founding of our nation, and we had the Articles of Confederation. And with the Articles of Confederation, it was very hard to tax everybody. And so you had dominant economies like Virginia and New York and Philadelphia, for Pennsylvania, and they were sort of controlling everything. And is that what Europe is going through now? They have the Articles of Confederation. They really don't have something that's holding the countries together.
That's right, and they have enacted pieces of what you might call a confederation, but not an overall confederation. And the reason they have not enacted it is I don't think they could get the political support to do it.
The future, other countries going to pull out?
Yeah, I think the most likely country to pull out would be Italy.
Italy. I haven't seen that anywhere.
Yeah. Well, I've seen that discussed, and the Italians are leaning more and more in that direction. And significantly, last week, let me see, we're already into Wednesday, so it's less than a week old. They had mayoral elections in Italy, And the question was, would
Are
the
that
people...
in every?
A lot of mayors were reelected.
mayors.
And these are very important elections in Italy.
Mhm.
Because the cities are equivalent to like our states in some respects in
Mhm.
political. That's a broad generalization. But the question was, would the center right be elected or the center left be elected? And most of the mayors who were center right were elected. So that indicates that the Italian people are leaning in that direction.
Does that mean they might pull out of the?
That's right. They might pull out just like in Britain if they want to.
You know, I was in Rome last year. It was the first time I'd really spent a lot of time in Rome, and the reason I love being in the United States, and when I travel, I've always traveled a lot. I've always hungered to come home. It's a strange thing, but in Rome, it just surprised me. I was speaking to all these restaurant people because you're always eating out, and I said, "Well, why'd you go in the restaurant business?" They said, "Well, because the country is owned by people that have owned it for centuries. So the only entrepreneurial effort I can have is a restaurant. I mean, I can't create a new automobile industry that's owned. All the major manufacturers, all the major farms are owned by people that own for centuries. So I can't become a farmer anymore. The only entrepreneurial effort is of being a restaurant owner."
That's interesting.
Isn't that a sad thing? I mean, as a journalist, I always talk to the normal people. Wherever I go, I talk because you get more insight into a country usually with the normal people because they're talking common sense, you know.
Nothing like wandering around talking to the locals about it.
But isn't that true about Italy? From an
Well, it's true
economic
of all
point of
of
view, you
Europe.
studied all of Europe.
It's all of Europe. Why do you think people immigrated to the United States? Because they could come to the United States and they could actually own their own land, they could own their own farms, and they could start their own businesses.
Richard, your family, why did they come to the United States from Scotland?
Well, on one side, they probably came when they began herding people off the land. In other words, they began the people that owned the land began getting the settlers off their land
because they didn't need as many people.
No, you didn't. They were raising sheep, and they didn't need people. They just needed a few, and they had no jobs. They had no place to go, and so my family came over as did most, without anything, looking for land, looking for opportunity, and they kept going west until they reached the Pacific Ocean, and they stopped in Oregon, most of them, and a lot of them for some reason, I don't know why, ended up loggers, but that's because they ended up in Oregon, not because they were loggers in Scotland. But and farmers, small farmers.
If you really want to know the pioneers of the United States, I found if you go to Oregon and you go to Alaska, those were true. Those are the real pioneers, and they're very independent people.
They're difficult people.
They're difficult people.
Like the Scots themselves.
Yeah, but the Oregonians are very independent people. You go to Alaska, they're very independent.
That's why people go to Alaska.
Yes, that's what, they still go to Alaska.
Yeah.
But Bob, that's the wonderful thing about America, that there is ability to move. And I was in Hamburg, and I was in the Port of Hamburg, and I had the Port of Hamburg director, and I saw these houses on the hill, mansions, fantastic houses. And I said, "Who owns those houses?" He said, "The same people that have owned it for 1,000 years."
Yeah, that's interesting.
And you've had 2 wars since then. They still own those houses.
You know, I working with CIA for 40-some years, over 35 years. I never found Europe very interesting, and I avoided working on Europe for the most part, with a couple exceptions. I always liked the Norwegians because they were always an independent group of people.
Absolutely.
I liked the Norwegians, and I liked the Scots. But most of the Europeans I found difficult to deal with, and I didn't find them nearly as attractive as, say, other people in the world, the other people in the Middle East or Africa, and the problems weren't nearly as interesting to me. So I probably learned less about Europe than I should have. Going back to your problem on the issue of Brexit in Europe, though, it's hard to imagine that the current party in charge in the UK that arrangement is going to last very long. Here you have the government aligned with the Democratic Unionist Party of Northern Ireland, a splinter party. How is that ever going to work?
That's the question. When
The
we come
DUP.
back, when we come back, let's answer that question. Richard's going to answer the question.
You have the power to help us help others.
He promises a lot.
It won't.
But after that, let's go into education.
Okay.
Okay. But talk about the sacrificial lamb. She is the sacrifice. I never thought of that. But yes, they want her to do it. Get rid of her and bring in fresh blood.
Yeah, yeah.
I never.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in those terms. That's
But
a good.
look, since she became prime minister, she's had one and only one focus, and that's Brexit.
Yeah, yeah. That's her job.
Think about that.
No,
That's her job. She's going to get it done,
The powers that be in England.
and she'll do anything to get it. And so she went to the Northern Irish,
Yes.
the Protestants, to get the votes to stay in office, to get the job done. Everything is about getting Brexit done.
Yeah.
Look who she just appointed as her leader for that movement.
Yes.
He's very conservative about it, and he wants a clean break.
Yeah. He's stronger than she is in that.
He is.
Yes.
And but she knew that she needed that, and she went to the right person.
Well, I found
I
in
don't know his
covering,
name,
in covering what Asia said, in covering most of the world, a lot of the powers that be run things. And this country's so big, and we're such an independent nation, thank God, it's very hard for them to run things. They would like to. I've interviewed David Rockefeller. They would like to, and he was a benign.
They have influence.
They have influence. And David Rockefeller was a benign dictator. You know what I mean? He was very wonderful, nice man.
You know, an interesting topic for us to cover, I think at some point, is this drain the swamp business.
Okay. Okay.
Have you
But
been
let's do
following
education
that?
first, then
We'll do
swamp.
education.
Okay.
I'm not saying necessarily today.
Okay.
Maybe some future.
Yeah,
day.
that might be worthwhile to look at what's happened, what's been done, and what
Yeah.
difference it makes.
I
Well,
don't think he's.
and this is the whole future of the budget.
I don't think he's drained the swamp very much.
No, he is not. And that's the reason it's good
Yeah,
to talk about.
he wants to, but
It's tough.
You
A
look
lot
at
of
this,
alligators out there.
you won't
Washington's strong.
You won't convince him he's drained the swamp until real estate values in Washington, D.C. go down.
Oh, they're not going to go down.
Then you know he's drained the swamp.
That's a great indication. It's like
It's a
talking
litmus
to the
test.
head of the New York Stock Exchange.
I don't know whether I agree with that or not.
Really?
There's only, yeah,
Well, the New York Stock
Well,
Exchange.
you've lived there. So
I have. I don't see them going down ever.
Well, the head of the New York Stock
They
Exchange.
did at one point.
The
Yeah.
head of the New York Stock Exchange said he was on his train, and how he determined what the economy was going to do. He'd look at the rail cars, and if there are a lot of rail cars, freight cars,
Right,
he
right.
said things are going well. When they start going, he said, "Oh, we're going to have a
Oh
recession."
yeah, yeah.
Who said that?
The head of the New York Stock Exchange.
And Greenspan ran monetary policy on one thing and one thing only: the price of gold.
Did he? You know, I've interviewed Greenspan a few times, and he's a strange dude.
I know, he just never seemed to be the right person for that. How could they pick a guy like that?
He's not a public person at all.
No.
But he is
This is the
a
last spot. Stand
he
by
is
for the
a
rejoin.
fighter. He is a go for the jugular. People, they didn't realize how tough and nasty he could be.
Right.
If you crossed him,
Well-
you were gone.
You see, Volcker was a bigger than life character, and I
Yeah,
think they wanted to
literally.
get somebody in who was really solid. Okay, yeah. He was. He still is.
Yeah, he's a big,
He's a
he's
big man.
6'7".
Big cigar. He'd walk into his meetings with his not like it's lit, but big cigar.
Hey, it's Stanford Erickson. We're here again with Bob Edminster, a PhD economist, and Richard Kerr, former deputy director of the CIA, and at Stanford Erickson. I was a journalist for a number of years. Could we talk a little bit about education, because education is really what affects everybody in this country. If people are going to vote, they have to be educated. What has happened to our educational system? I mean, you discussed that. What do you think, Bob? You've been an educator for a lot of years.
Well, of course, we have one of the greatest educational systems in the world. And that's bar none. And people from all over the world come and become educated in the United States. My focus was on business education. And if you look at the people who come for the graduate schools, which is probably the pinnacle of it all, the MBA, the Masters of Business Administration, has been the perennial favorite of people from all nationalities, all religions, and so on and so forth, and continues to be today. But one of the big issues is whether we have kind of a liberalism fomented by educators. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's why we have charter schools now, and people are homeschooling people. And
homeschooling is a way to get away from the establishment education. And there have been some arguments at both secondary level and college education that the educational system has become more politicized as opposed to more technical in nature.
You know, I went to public education, and I sent my kids to public education because I believed in integrating them into society. But when I was at Berkeley, I mean, if you were not a progressive person, you just didn't fit into Berkeley at all. I mean,
what time frame are you talking about?
This was, this is in the '60s. This was I was there '57 to '61, and then did graduate school and to '64. But it was a very progressive. I didn't even know a Republican at that time. I didn't know anybody who was a Republican.
Well, one of the great things about American education is that it does support the concept that you have a right to your voice and you can protest, and that this is in fact the American way. Now, out of that, however, has come the perception that educators are socialists and so forth, but that's not universally true at all.
But you look at especially some of our elite schools, I mean, even the administrators are letting the people, the students, do away with free speech, and they have these protective zones where they can't even take on what they think is someone bullying them. I mean, I've seen that back in the '60s. It's almost going back to that time. Richard?
Well, I guess I got out of college. I went to University of Oregon, which was became an extremely liberal school, but it wasn't that much when I was there. I graduated in 1960 after a year of graduate school, and I assume it was probably pretty liberal then. But since then, when I was in CIA, I used to go to a lot of universities and talk to universities, and some I was greeted with fairly open arms of people who wanted
deputy director of the CIA
at various jobs, senior jobs. Okay. Some I was greeted with fairly open arms of people who really wanted a job in CIA, and others all I got were protest things. I'll tell you a story about that if you're interested.
Yeah.
And I at one point in time, I think when I wasn't the deputy director. I was one level down in the agency. At the University of Oregon, they would not allow CIA recruiters onto the campus. You couldn't come, they wouldn't let them on the campus. If the CIA recruiter wanted to recruit somebody, they would have to make special appointments with people.
Is that a land-grant school?
It's a land-grant school.
So they're required to do that?
They're required, but they wouldn't do it. So I wrote several letters to the president of the University of Oregon and said, this is ridiculous. I said, I would like to come out and talk to the university, and
as a graduate,
and as a former graduate of the University of Oregon, I'd like to come out and talk about CIA, and I'm glad to answer any questions that people have. So of course, they immediately sent chills down their spine, and they wrote letters back saying, no, we can't do it because we can't guarantee your security. I said, don't worry about my security. I'll bring my own security with me. And so they said, well, and this went on for several letters. Finally, the university came back and said, all right, come out during a particular period of time. I went out. It happened to be when school was out. and they had set up a few meetings with some professors. So I said, okay, that's fine. Went back and I wrote another letter saying, that is not adequate. I want to talk to the university, the people in the university. And they said, no, we won't do it. I finally got an invitation from the gay lesbian group at the University of Oregon to come and speak before
open-minded people.
and so I did. Now my organization, my CI was not happy about my response. They said, you can't accept that. I said, the hell I can. And I went out and I had a whole auditorium of people. I don't know. There may have been a couple gays and lesbians in the audience, but most of them were just student body. It was very interesting, reasonably noisy and raucous, with people asking questions about, well, aren't you doing some terrible things here in Guatemala, and when are you going to stop killing your mother, kind of things. But mostly it was serious questions about foreign policy, and it worked out reasonably well. And I always thought that was one of my better moments, being accepted by. Being requested to come out by the gay lesbian group at the university.
I'm so happy that you did that, because I think it's very important that, especially like the CIA or FBI, that the heads of that interact with the people.
If you can't defend your organization, then you don't belong in it.
Yes. And it under Hoover, we were very concerned about the FBI, and it's very important that these organizations are open to the public, and there's oversight on them.
We had a pretty good outreach program. I went to Colorado, to one of the big schools in Colorado, and had nearly caused a riot at one area. It worked out all right, but it was. And I used to go to University of Texas and variety place. Actually, the place that was interesting would be to go down to College Station. Of course, it was a former military school. A lot of people in the military reserves and things. So it was a perfect place for CIA to go. I was never asked to go to Harvard. Oh, no, that's not true. I was asked to go to talk at Princeton one time, to small groups.
We'll be back. We have another half hour of the Rhett Palmer Show. Okay.
That's a good ending. That's good.
Yeah. Now, there was one other thing you wanted to bring up. What was that?
Well, let's go back to that, because I think your point, and we didn't follow it very through, and that is schools are changing. They're becoming more technical. Also, there's an awful lot of schools that are doing it by online.
Right, and those schools...
That changes the whole nature of
Exactly. You don't have the dynamic of a professor who can slip in liberal viewpoints.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's more cost effective too, in terms of the
Yeah, but if we're talking about the social aspects of the
yes.
university, which I think is the theme here.
Well, also, but it's how do you make public education viable? I mean,
Yeah, that's a separate issue. The economics.
You don't get as good an education.
You don't get as good an
Do
education.
you think? Online, if you do it online. I don't see how
don't,
you can.
Well,
The exchange with students and professors is part of the dynamic of learning.
Anyway, let's bring that up.
yeah, we can talk about that,
Yeah.
because I'm going to tell you that I think the students learn the material better,
Yes.
but they don't get the enrichment of that one-on-one contact between the professor and the student.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Yeah.
You probably can learn the material better.
Yeah.
Or should be able to. You're probably motivated
But
to
it
do
becomes more standardized and personal. And part of college is being non-standard, being a radical. That's part of college. Okay.
Sure.
And it's a perfect time in life for most people to be a little radicalized.
I was married and had children. So.
Well, I had a job, so I didn't have any of that social interaction. I commuted to Berkeley. I was the only one.
You commuted to Berkeley?
From San Francisco every day.
Did you walk down Telegraph Avenue or anything like that?
Well,
did you have a tie-dye? Do you know they still sell them there?
The interesting thing is, in 4 years, I had more units than anyone else graduating in 4 years, and I was the only person they knew that ever graduated commuting 4 years.
Really?
The only person.
I graduated in 3 years.
Yeah, so you're the same way. I just wanted to get to the
But I
degree.
took 20 hours.
I did too.
I mean, I took.
Jeez, you guys beat me. I took 3.5 years to get through.
Yeah. But you know, I was married and had children. I wanted to get the hell out of school.
Well, I had more units than
You were
anyone
motivated.
because I was taking 20, 21 units.
Yeah.
I loved education.
I did.
Oh, that's
the
a
courses.
heavy load.
Oh, I
Good
know.
grief.
When I took Latin and chemistry the same time, I almost died
Really?
because you got to memorize both.
Yeah.
Chemistry is basically you memorize. It's just.
Yeah, I remember I took physics and Russian at the same time,
Oh yeah.
and I did not do well in Russian. Languages were not my strength,
It's yeah, that was tough.
and physics wasn't my
How much
strength.
time we got?
We got.
Is it here?
It should start in a few minutes, according to this. Let's see, 10:34. That's what it says.
Well, we were both all overachievers, obviously.
Sure, because you don't realize it's the minority of students that graduate in 4 years, not the majority.
Is that so?
Mm-hmm. About 40%.
I didn't know.
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. They don't tell the parents that on the opening day.
Mhm.
You know, all my kids have graduated. And
United Way would like to say
They
thank
all
you
wanted out of
everyone
school.
in Indian River
Well.
County for your record-breaking generosity. They're working to ensure
well,
children
my
stay on
my
track to
middle son,
graduate from
my
high
youngest
school,
son
college,
didn't.
or
He didn't.
career
He
ready
left
to help more working
just before he
individuals and families
finished.
improve their financial
And he had to
literacy
go
and
back. He's
stability
back
to build
right
healthier
now,
communities for all
finishing up a
children,
degree
adults,
at
families,
50-some
and
years
seniors,
old.
and
Well, we
as
used to keep
pros,
statistics
follow
on that
leaders when they
sort of
need a
thing
hand up most.
and talk about
Longer
it.
term, your generosity helps lead
Like
the
you talk
field
about
towards
retention.
reaching their established
Yeah.
goals,
And the
making a
curious
positive
thing is, in
community
my
impact
50
on the
years,
education, financial
those
stability, and
statistics
health
haven't
of
really
area
changed.
residents. United Way builds
Is that right?
partnerships, forges consensus, and leverages
It's less
resources in
about
order to
what
advance the
universities
common
do
good.
and more
They
about
want to see
just
all
people.
Indian River County residents
Human
have a
nature.
quality
Human
education
nature, making
that leads to a
commitments,
stable
following
job,
through on them,
enough income
having the
to support a
persistence
family through
to
retirement
succeed.
and good health.
Those things
You've
don't
helped them
change.
strive
Yeah,
towards that
that's
success.
interesting.
Thank you for your generous donations, and let's all live united.
Today's show is sponsored by Dr. Alex Plains, Custom Family Dentistry and Dental Implants. Nobody looks forward to going to the dentist, but Dr. Plains offers conscious sedation for dental phobia. Dr. Plains and his staff likes to help people with friendly atmosphere and a stress-free visit. His office is located just south of the Village Beach Market, 4755 North A1A, or his website, plainsdentalarts.com, or call 231-6004. That's 231-6004.
You're still playing tennis. I envy you.
So to help with your next dental need,
It's great.
I stopped a few years ago, and I shouldn't have.
I was the same way. I didn't want a new knee, so I stopped playing tennis.
sedation to open
I
up
just got
dental phobia. That's
to the point where I wasn't playing well enough. I used to be a good tennis player, and I just wasn't playing well. And I thought, this isn't as fun, as much fun anymore.
Yeah, sure.
And I
Well-
shouldn't. I shouldn't.
Yeah, it's hard to keep going sometimes. You played for years, and
Yeah, I started when I was in high school,
oh my goodness.
and I played all my life.
I was on the tennis high school team.
So was I.
Oh, you were?
Well, I played baseball and I got bored. Third base.
So did I.
I just said
I was a-
baseball's boring.
I was a pitcher, and I said I don't like this. And a friend of mine was a tennis player.
Well, the coach said, "Well, you're the last class. You have to be in something. Go into tennis. They need people."
My father was never so disappointed in me when I stopped baseball to play tennis.
I just got
Thought it
bored.
was a pansy game.
A women's game almost.
And my school ended up having the longest run of victories, I think, in the nation.
Wow.
High school. Had a high school coach. We won 119 matches in a row.
Oh my gosh. Really?
Yeah,
Oh, that's unbelievable.
it was incredible. And we sent people to state, and I was the fifth man on the team, so I wasn't the best player.
Okay.
You're in the open. Stand by.
now the most trusted name in radio, Rhett.
It's Stanford Erickson with Rhett Palmer, sitting in for Rhett Palmer. I miss him. I'm certain you do too. But we're speaking about education with Bob. Mr. Why did you go into education?
I went into education because I wanted to make a difference. I'd been a banker and looked like I was doing the same job, day after day after day. Even though I was in commercial lending, business lending, which is very unique, I wanted to make a difference.
And were you able to make a difference?
I think so. A great deal of my effort, time, and passion was in producing unique research that is solving major problems that nobody had ever tackled before and successfully found solutions.
In what area?
My specialization is finance, and particularly business finance, banking, making loans to businesses, that type of thing, and the stock market.
And the students that you interacted with, were they did they already have an ideology when they came?
When they came to me, I never really asked them what their ideology was.
I mean, could you feel there was an ideology?
But I could feel it was there. These were primarily students who wanted to go out and become business leaders.
Mm-hmm. And that, so therefore they were progressive Democrats, or because they wanted to be business leaders?
Oh, I think there are great Democrats and Republicans who are business leaders.
Okay.
All right. I think there's some fantastic people of all parties, political viewpoints, religious viewpoints, and so forth.
Well, why, through the 60s, I saw because of the Vietnam War, the disruption that took place on the campuses. We're having a similar disruption on the campuses. Why is that taking place?
The disruption of the Vietnam War era was really significant. And at the time, I was on the campus of Ohio State University and would spend my days doing classes, doing research, and so forth. And then about 5 o'clock, I would go out to see the riots, and sometimes be running with everybody with tear gas fired around me, and then go home and watch it on TV.
And today, why there seems to be this so-called resistance movement? It seems to be taking hold in a lot of our institutions of higher learning.
Well, certainly the resistance movement is going to attract people who want to beat down the establishment, no matter what the establishment is. So I think that's what a lot of it is.
Richard, you were part of the establishment for a long time.
Yes.
But you're very unique in that. I mean, I covered Washington. I covered people like you, and a lot of the establishment people, they would rather not let anybody know who they were. I mean, they sort of enjoyed the anonymity because they thought they had more power and less oversight. You don't seem to be that way at all.
Well, I was never never that much political, in the sense that I tried to stay out of politics as a member of the agency. I thought it was inappropriate for me to be involved in politics, even local politics. I was a follower of the Hatch Act, literally. I didn't believe, so I had personal views, obviously, but I didn't make those public. So in that sense, I had a private set of opinions about, but not public. Now, if I would have been in college during the Vietnam War, I would have been in the streets protesting the Vietnam War, because I thought even when I was in the CIA that it was a war that we should not have engaged in. We didn't really know what we were trying to bring. I think democracy. We were trying to bring democracy to a country. We were trying to, and some people were trying to help the South, but we really didn't understand the consequences of what we were about, and we didn't understand the enemy, the North Vietnamese, and we didn't understand what they were about, and nationalism in Vietnam.
Well, a key to that, wasn't it, that after North Vietnamese won, they took on China, we thought they would
That's
be
right.
part of China. They would
No.
just fall into this domino
No,
pattern.
absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. They fought a small war with China,
Yes.
and they beat the Chinese.
Yes, because
they beat the hell out of them.
because it was more of a. They wanted to run their own country. They didn't
That's
want
right.
anything imposed on them, and we were seeing a domino effect in terms of communism. But there was no domino effect.
Well, I was involved with Vietnam in supporting at different times, and I spent a little time and a lot of time on Laos and little time in Laos. And my view
During
early,
the Vietnam War.
yeah, and my view was that fairly early on, actually, I have to be careful what I'm saying here because I don't want to get too far out into areas where I shouldn't be. But it was pretty clear to me, we were involved, we had captured a North Vietnamese in Laos who had been fighting in Laos for 30 years.
30 years.
He fought the French then.
He had fought the French. And no, it wouldn't be 30 years, it would be 20 years.
Yeah.
And there, just listening to him and debriefing him, it was pretty clear that we weren't going to stay, and they were. That they were going to stay. They were going to stay for the course, and they were going to win. And I thought at that time, and that was in the late '60s, that our effort in Vietnam and in Laos was doomed.
Yeah, the Asian mentality is a lot different from the Western mentality. You know, I was married to a Korean woman for 36 years, a wonderful Korean woman for 36 years. But the Asian mentality is that we've been here a long time,
Patience.
and we're going to stay a long time, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's a different mindset where,
Yeah.
I mean, she would, in buying clothes, she'd always buy something that she could wear for 20 years. It'd be classical stuff. And we Americans would buy jeans or shirts that we dispose of, right? I mean, we don't even think like
We're a
that.
disposable.
We're disposable.
Let's take that thought back to education. If you look at education and understand the administration of it, you go back to the religious orders that established the schools to begin with. And when they established them, they gave great powers to the other priests who were teaching, and that remains today. The faculty runs the university. The faculty does,
Not the administration.
not the administration. You
And
can't go
even
to
the chair, you
administration.
were a chair, but even the chair
The
doesn't.
dean doesn't
The
even
dean
run
doesn't,
it.
yeah.
No. In fact, the common joke is you're a dean, right? And it's like herding cats. They run around, they scurry around. You really never run them anywhere. And as a faculty member, I was one of the cats, right? And I cherished my freedom and my rights to express myself as I believe the truth should be expressed. And the administration never corrected me. And as an administrator, I never imposed my views on any of the faculty members. So from that basis, you see, you can get a faculty who believe in whatever you may be opposed to, right? But they're going to believe it, and they're going to carry it out, and it's their right.
Well, in all my career, I was the #1 education writer for McGraw-Hill, and so I didn't know much education, so I started reading. And John Dewey, out of Columbia, helped create our educational system. John Dewey was he created he believed in he did not believe in God, so he believed in a progressive socialism. John Dewey. Mm-hmm. So he created the system to some degree that we have. A lot of people don't know that. He wrote the Manifesto of the Humanist, Manifesto Society. He created the Humanist Society and wrote their manifesto. So a lot of people don't know that has permeated our education, especially with the young people. But we'll come back. We have another 15 minutes on the Rhett Palmer Show.
New Beauty Magazine, Castle Connolly and OMD have in
But
common.
if you I didn't know education. I'm writing on it, so I started really studying.
Good. I never did that. I never read Dewey. University of Chicago?
No, Columbia.
Oh, what?
Chicago was Hutchinson. I interviewed Hutchinson.
Okay, last segment, and I need some help cleaning up in
Yeah,
here.
we'll clean up after.
Because he has two guests.
Okay, we'll do.
Okay.
Who's he?
Steve Olds.
Steve Olds.
Power of Small
Steve is
Business
very
the name of
interesting.
his show.
Oh, how about that?
And I'll help you here by taking this back in the control room.
Yep, got it. I got this. I'll leave the newspaper.
So that's curious.
Still on Facebook.
Yep.
My best known article is credit scoring for small business loans.
Is what?
Credit scoring, small business loans, published 1972. It was the first research to use empirical techniques to show or predict which loans would be good and which loans would be lost.
Let's go into that because the economy, our economy to a great extent in terms of growth, is always starting in small business.
It is, absolutely.
And that is so unique in the
And
world.
I come from a small business family.
Yeah, but that's unique in the world to some degree. The interesting thing, if you read Obama, is
Well, you're thinking of the European world.
yes,
Well, that goes right back to big families, big businesses
Yes.
established, and they go on forever.
yes,
It's cultural.
yes.
We come from a family, we come from a farm background.
Yeah.
That's small business.
Yes. Yeah, let's go into that.
That might be an interesting kind of change.
And craft.
Yeah,
Right.
craft, yeah.
Craft and
One
farm.
last thing, let me get your mic down a little bit so you're talking directly and sit up like you're talking.
Yeah.
This is CJ Cannon's, the warm and
Okay.
There you
friendly
go.
restaurant at the Vero Beach Regional Airport, where the only thing they overlook is the runway. You are their prime concern at this great restaurant, serving you from morning to night. That's right, eggs Benedict par excellence in the morning to prime rib at night with hamburgers.
Thank you too for taking 3 hours, a long time.
You told me to be here around 8:30ish.
You know, I thought Phyllis let Phyllis do her thing for
I know.
about half
Okay,
an hour.
no, okay.
That's what I
All right.
wanted Phyllis to do
Okay,
that.
so I did the right thing.
Yeah, no,
Okay, all right.
no, I wanted Phyllis to do her
I
thing,
understand, it's okay.
and I knew that.
It also breaks the show up a little bit. To have
Yes,
people come.
and I thought Richard would like, he could talk about regionalism a little
Yeah.
bit with her.
I really can't.
Yeah.
She's beyond us.
Yeah, she is.
She is definitely an expert in that field.
She's a very bright lady. I mean,
I know we're all trying to get her to kind of come out.
yeah, but she's she's learning to speak up, but she's a very thorough, bright.
You think?
I mean, she's a scholar.
Uh-huh.
You know
She
the
is.
scholars?
Oh, I can
Yeah.
tell.
Oh, yeah, she's a scholar. And I was a scholar one time when I was getting my master's degree, because you had to be.
Sure.
If 16 hours a day I'd be studying
Well,
a little small subject.
that's what college is all about. It's
Yeah,
scholarship.
and I loved it. That was the greatest experience I had in education.
Yeah.
I knew more about Greek tragedy than the professors. So the great thing about it, my thesis was approved because no one understood.
Right.
My orals were approved because no one understood. They just gave me an A because I took a topic that no
'Cause
one
you learned
understood.
it. Yeah, right.
I was more expert than anybody there. And I didn't realize it at the time. I was just interested in,
That's right.
plays.
Yeah.
And my thesis was Long Day's Journey into Night. Is it a definition of a tragedy? And no, I defined that as a melodrama in terms of what. And everybody said, oh, what the Greek said, what Aristotle said, what.
This is the last spot. Stand by for the
He
rejoin.
said, you're okay. Go on.
I can believe that. My thesis was the first Duma,
What's the first Duma?
the first legislative group in Russia.
Really?
Oh.
Oh my.
Oh, yes.
What year was that?
It was right after the
Yeah.
right at the beginning of World War One. Or
Hey, it's Stanford Erickson for the Rhett Palmer Show. Be sure to listen in tomorrow and you'll hear Rhett Palmer. We're just with Richard Kerr, former Deputy Director of the CIA, and we have Bob Edsminster, PhD and Dean of School. We're talking about how education really affects people. And you were saying that how you were useful is that you created a document in terms of small business, right?
Yes, that's been my focus, and I come from a small business family. And I've published the first research on selecting small business loans using empirical methods. sometimes called credit scoring.
And what'd you determine on that?
I found that credit scoring was, in fact, a better technique than using humans for a lot of small business lending, and that it could aid in the elimination of loan losses.
Well, the nice thing about the United States, we are a small business. The fastest part of our economy is always small business, right?
Yeah.
That's what turns around our depressions, recessions. That's not true. And Europe, I know it's not true. It's Asia, it's not true.
Small business is the generator of growth in the United States. When people have ideas and can carry them out, we go back to our heritage as farmers who could plant what crops they wanted to plant, basket weavers and other kinds of crafts and trade, and they could develop what they wanted, and it was up to the market to test them, not some administration or some religious order or government.
Well, what surprises me, Richard, is that the developers in the internet world, they're creating small business, and they did it, but they tend to be social democrats. I mean,
that's an interesting question.
I don't know why, because our economy, our capitalist economy, created their business.
Maybe it's their generation, and the culture they grew up in. Yeah, I don't know. That must be an explanation in there somewhere. I don't think it's what they ended up. They're that way because of what they ended up doing necessarily. Well, maybe. I don't know. What do you?
I'll tell you, I think America has always had this spirit of rewarding people who came up with great ideas in business. And most of those ideas came out of small businesses.
I believe in rewarding people. When I was an editor, we had a union, and you had to pay the reporters a certain amount of money, which I did. But I always paid the people that were our best people more. And the union was very upset with me. Why are you paying them more? I said, well, because people read them.
And they're worth it.
And I did market studies, and I paid the people that people wanted to read. And I had people, believe it or not, well-known people in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal that wanted to work for my newspaper because I was paying them more than they were being paid at the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. Because New York Times, if you work for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, you're not working there for money, you're working there for prestige. So they never paid them. The problem with that is those people were always making money on the side some way, generally. And that sort of influenced how they wrote.
Are you saying people like to get paid?
People,
and they like to get paid very well, don't they?
Well, I found as a manager, normally people do what they get paid for. If they get paid more money to do this, they'll do this, and that's a good way of managing people by paying them for what you need being done.
That's right.
But and I love unions. I grew up in unions, but the unions fight that because they believe in this equality. And the socialism, to some degree, has the same thing. We believe in this equality. Well, nothing moves ahead. It's mediocrity when you have equality.
And we don't want mediocrity, do we? We want the very best. We want to buy the very best cell phone we can get going.
Yes.
And we want the very best social networking site. And it goes right through everything. So we reward those people that come up with the very best.
It is interesting because I worked in a government organization where there are real limits to what pay can be given to people and what bonuses. So I was always struck by the degree to which people stayed at CIA, for instance, and where they could go and make considerably more money in other areas. So there was a psychic reward, a reward for what they felt they were doing. Now, they were still making enough money too. They were getting promoted and they were moving along, so they could see the advantages of progress. But we never really were able to pay people what they were worth.
A psychic reward is very important. Education, there's a psychic reward. Journalism, absolutely, is determined by psychic reward to some degree. But I know people working for the government, and they work very hard. And they aren't allowed when they go to Japan from Washington D.C. Senior people, they have to go and coach. I mean that's about the dumbest thing I ever heard. We should not do that to our people.
And you can't use the airline mileage either.
Yeah,
you have to turn the airline mileage back into the government.
Right. I mean, talk about foolish rules.
Those are foolish rules. You know, it's been 3 hours. We've been talking here on the Rhett Palmer Show in terms of the gentlemen that are here and Phyllis that was here. We love America. What makes America unique? And we want to keep it unique. Is that not so? We just want to keep it unique.
Unique in the sense we want it to be the very best.
Yes.
We want this to be the place that lives up to the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, we are, I believe we have been an exceptional nation. Many bad things about us, but how do we keep it being an exceptional nation?
Well, I worry that there are an increasing number of people that seem to be unwilling, for instance, unwilling to work, who don't want to work, who would rather be on relief or on, that's a very worrisome trend. But then I look at another group of people, I look at my own children and grandchildren and look at what they're doing and I say, well, they're working and they're going out and doing. So I'm not sure that my generalizations about those on relief are very good, you know. I still think there's a core of people and a larger group of people in this country that still have the value of work, still are rewarded by work and achievement.
Well, those were the people that voted for Mr. Trump.
I think so.
Those were the people, and the Democrats now are sort of flailing because they were for these various diverse groups and protecting these diverse groups, but the people that wanted to work and get the country going voted for Mr. Trump. So interesting times. We'll be back again. Usually we call these the facile fossils. Whenever Rhett Palmer lets us come back, we'll be here to talk to you, and we hope to hear from you as well. Stanford Erickson signing off for Rhett Palmer.
Good ending.
Good job.
Yeah, very nice.
Once again, you made it through 3 hours.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Paul was
It seems
fun.
like a long
Well,
time
Paul
when you
was
look at
fun
it
because Paul, he would talk whether you're saying something or not.
Good show.
Okay, got everything.
How you doing?
Good, good.
Thank you, Mr. B.
Yep, and I'll see you next week,
Yes, okay.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, okay.
He's still gone,
Okay. I didn't know he was.
coming back, go
Next
ahead.
week?
Are you back?
Yeah.
You're the,
Yeah.
Coming back the 7th.
oh my God, we'll have to think of some good topics.
I know. We got.
I'll get a stump the Rhett and I'll
Get a
stump the
stump of
fossils.
that. Yeah, we need some fun. Yeah, we need some fun.
Okay.
The fossils.
We'll do the stump the fossils.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know why these microphones were changed.